All right. Thank you, Mr. Ledmar. Good evening, members of the board, and who tonight is appearing in the capacity of the audit committee and also two community members of the audit committee. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with me. This is one of two required meetings required by New York State that the audit committee of a school district has to have with the external auditor, excuse me. So this meeting is to kick off the upcoming audit for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. And as you are all accustomed to, after we complete the audit, there will be an exit meeting. That's the second required meeting, during which I would appear in front of you and go over the draft audit reports and answer whatever questions you may have. Okay, so I have provided a handout to you last week, and thank you very much. Okay, I do have a few hard copies here for those who didn't bring theirs or feel it might be easier for them to read a hard copy. Does anyone need one? All right, great, fantastic. Okay, so please go to the third page, or page 2 rather. Okay, I'm required to, even though it seems like every year we're talking about similar items, and these are required disclosures, if you would, or required discussions that I have to go over with the audit committee prior to every external audit. Okay, first of all, the objectives of the external audit engagement. So we, as your external auditors, our primary objective is to audit your annual financial statements and to express an opinion about whether or not your district's annual financial statements were prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and that they were free of material misstatements. We're also required by government auditing standards to issue a report about your district's internal control over financial reporting, as well as your compliance with laws, regulations, and provisions of contracts and grant agreements, specifically federal grants. Also, the district has oversight responsibility over the student club money. The official name of the student club money is the Extra Classroom Activity Funds. And you're required by state education commissioners regulations to conduct an audit annually. And so we will be auditing those financial statements as well. I mentioned the federal single audit. That is required whenever an entity received and expended federal awards in a fiscal year that exceeds $750,000. And historically, your district has received over $1 million in these federal awards. And so we do anticipate that you will continue to be subject to the federal single audit requirement. The federal single audit is really a program compliance audit. And every fiscal year, we have to review your federal awards, and we have to assess the risk of each of those programs to identify the higher risk one. The higher risk one may be higher risk because it has not been audited for single audit purposes for the last couple of years, or it may be because it's a new program, or maybe because simply it's the largest federal awards that you have received in any given year. It doesn't mean that you have poor internal controls. It's just, it's just a process that we as external auditors have to go through. And this program compliance audit is really regulated by the federal government. Every year they issue what's known as compliance supplements, which are basically audit programs that auditors have to follow to conduct these program compliance. And each grant have different compliance requirements. So it does make a difference from year to year which programs or which grant award is selected as a major program for single audit purposes. Okay, going on to the next page. Some disclaimer, if you would, there are limitations to an external audit. Okay, after all, the external audit is really more of a bird's eye view, if you would, of an audit. It is not a forensic audit. It does not include a detailed examination of all accounts and transactions. Okay, this is very important to point out. Over the course of my career, there have been countless times where I've read reports about some errors that went undetected by the auditors, and it was uncovered later on, and the questions would always be, well, how come the auditors didn't find it? Well, the external audit, especially for the external audit of financial statements, okay, it's conducted based on a sampling basis. It's on a testing basis. We review an entity's internal controls. We identify the high risk area versus the low risk areas. And the audit resources will be focused on the higher risk areas, okay? And we would perform testing of the internal control system to see whether or not they're operating effectively, okay? And in addition to testing the internal controls, if they are operating effective based on our testing results, then we have a certain comfort level that your internal control systems should be able to catch or prevent, a lot of errors and, even fraudulent activities. However, in the external audit world, we're dealing with reasonable assurance and not absolute assurance. Okay, so based on the testing of the internal controls, we then go ahead and perform more substantive testing of account balances. But that's also based on a sampling basis. If you have 10,000 transactions in a given year for a certain account, we would select 40 as a sample size, the initial sample size. If there are no findings, no exceptions noted in those 40 samples, and based on our testing of the internal controls, then we are satisfied that your account is likely reasonably stated, okay? If we have exceptions, then we increase our sample size. So you can see right there, the external audit will not necessarily find all the errors or misstatements, okay? So that is a very, very important concept that I need to disclose to you, okay? No matter how well designed and how properly designed an audit engagement is, there's always the possibility that there would be some misstatement that would not be detected by the external audit. Okay. Auditor's responsibilities. We have to follow auditing guidelines issued by our profession, the AICPA, as well as government auditing standards issued by the US government, as well as the aforementioned federal single audit and program compliance under the Office of Management and Budget of the federal government. If we come across any internal controls related issues or matters during our audit, we are required to report to those charged with governance, which of course in this case it's the audit committee as well as the Board of Education. I do need to also talk about internal controls. I did mention earlier that we will be testing your internal controls for its effectiveness. But the primary objective of the audit engagement, the external audit engagement, is not for us to issue an opinion about your internal controls effectiveness, okay? So it's also important for me to note that. Having said that, if there are internal controls deficiencies, I will report to you in writing, okay? Maintaining independence and an attitude of professional skepticism. This would be the sixth year that I will be your external auditors. And even though we've had, the past 5 years, and your district is now a known entity, to us, okay. And as much as I know how well the business office is functioning, okay, every year we approach the audit, with a fresh set of eyes, okay. We don't automatically assume that everything will be fine, okay, and we have to maintain our skepticism that somewhere along the line something might have happened during this current fiscal year, okay. And of course, auditors' independence is of the utmost importance. I am engaged by the Board of Education. I report to the Board of Education, but I also work closely with the district administration. Okay, the district administration is the management of the school district's finances, and so we need their cooperation. We need to work with them closely in order to complete the audit. But I know, who my client is, and I know my responsibility, and we have to make sure that our independence is not impaired, okay, when we conduct the audit, and we are very mindful of that important fact. All right. Now on the next page, I've listed some of the district management's responsibilities. The annual financial statements, even though we do assist the business office in drafting the financial statements, those financial statements ultimately are the responsibilities of the district's management. So in that regard, after the audit field work is completed and we have gathered enough audit evidence, we would draft the financial statements. The draft financial statements are reviewed with Olivia and her staff, and we go through multiple times of basically back and forth to make sure that the disclosures are proper. The discussions in the management and discussions and analysis section are what the district management needs to communicate, and that we're comfortable with what's being communicated in those documents. And then those draft financial statements are then presented to the audit committee. So even though we help the district draft the financial statements, ultimately the responsibility for those financial statements rests with district's management. The maintaining effective internal controls over compliance with laws and regulations over financial reporting, as well as the prevention and detection of fraud. We are your auditors, and we can be your resources if there are questions about internal controls and how they should be designed. But ultimately, the primary responsibility for making sure that there are adequate internal controls in place also rests with district's management. Okay, if the district is aware of any significant deficiencies in the internal controls or breakdown in your internal controls, as well as allegations of fraud or actual fraud having been perpetuated or perpetrated against the district management, it is their responsibility to let us know so that we can respond accordingly and plan our audit accordingly. Making sure the financial records as well as the individuals whom we need to interview as part of our audit are being made available to us. And also if there are any material journal entries or adjustments that are identified by us during the audit, it is district management's responsibility to make sure that those adjustments are recorded and reflected in your books and records. And finally, because of all of those responsibilities, we will require district management, in this case, the superintendent, as well as your school business official, to sign off on a management representation letter. This is standard. Every audit must have this management representation letter in hand before the auditors will release the final audit report. Okay. All right. The next couple of pages talk about our audit approach. Basically, the audit can be we're separating the audit into two primary phases before the completion and reporting phase. The first phase would be the audit planning and risk assessment phase, and this is where we would come in. We would go into the business office. We would interview district personnel to gain an understanding of the current internal controls and procedures that the business office has been following. Once again, we do not assume that what was happening last year will be as far as prior years or prior practices and procedures are still the same year after year. We would, as part of our interviews with district personnel, we would question them and ask them whether or not there is other information that they would like to share with us, whether it's suspected fraudulent activities or known fraudulent activities. So those are some of the questions that we will be asking of district personnel. We will be reviewing your internal auditors' reports, as well as interviewing them. We typically would call them, and the purpose of doing that is so that we can get a better understanding of what the internal auditors, what concerned them, what they might have seen during the fiscal year. Your internal auditors are on site a lot more frequently than your external auditors. We're there once a year. Your internal auditors are there several times a year and conducting various required testing. In that regard, we would also be interviewing the claims auditor, and once again to find out what they might have detected during the year during their claims audit function, and whether or not they have seen anything that they believe to be inappropriate. Okay. And if during the year the district was party to any kind of other governmental agency audits, for example, federal government agencies or state government agencies audits, we will be requesting for those reports and reviewing the reports to help us understand whether or not there were other findings that other auditors might have noticed. Okay. We will be reviewing your board meeting minutes to help us identify important financial transactions that should be reflected in your annual financial statements. Okay. And at this time, we would also be performing testing of your internal control system. And I've listed the major cycle that we will be reviewing as part of our audit: payroll, purchasing and cash disbursements, cash receipts and collections, your accounting information system, and the bank reconciliations, as well as the recording of journal entries and budgetary transfers. The second part of the audit will take place after your district's business office has completed the closing of the fiscal year. Your district's fiscal year ends on June 30th, and typically it takes several weeks, usually 5, 6, 7 weeks for any school district to be able to complete the fiscal year-end close. And primarily it involves making sure that accounts payable and accounts receivable are properly recorded, as well as reviewing outstanding encumbrances at year-end to identify which ones are still outstanding and which ones should be reclassified as accounts payable. And then there are the grants that are recorded in the special aid fund, and those also have to be reviewed to make sure that all the relevant balances are properly reflected, so that we can report, or your district can report the proper grant expenditures, and it does have impact on the federal single audit. Revenue recognition, that's also another important area that we always focus on, making sure that the district is recording and reporting the revenues properly when you're entitled to it, or if you're not entitled to it just yet, making sure that it's not reflected in the current year's profit and loss, but rather on the balance sheet as a deferred as a liability or deferred income. Okay. Restricted reserves activities. As you know, the districts are entitled to, you are allowed to have legally established reserves, which you do have. And those reserves, the activities or the transactions involving those reserves are governed by various law provisions in state law, and primarily general municipal law, as well as the education law. So we will, as part of our audit, we will review the transactions or the activities affecting each of those reserves, and where there are funding and funding into the reserve or spending out of the reserve, we will be looking for evidence of board authorizations when it comes to most of the reserves. In the case of the capital reserves, we will be looking for evidence that the voters have authorized the spending of the capital reserves. Capital projects expenditures, that's another area that we focus on. Because of the nature of capital projects, they oftentimes they span multiple fiscal years. So it's important to not lose track of that, and making sure that your capital projects are not over committed. Okay, because ultimately, as you know, the voters' authorization authorizing the school district to spend up to a certain dollar amount. That's the absolute cap on how much you can spend on that particular capital project. And I've run into situations in the past, not at your school district, where It was a 5-year capital project. It was a over $70 million bond project, and so it took them several years. And by the last year, the business official had lost sight of how much money they had left and overcommitted the district. Okay, so it was not, of course, it was not pretty. Okay, so that is an area that we always pay attention to. Capital assets inventory report, that is an element that is now required, that has been required now because of GASB standard, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They issued a statement number 35, going back, I think, almost 22 years now, that requires local governments, including school districts, to report your capital assets and on the balance sheet and also calculate depreciation. So like all other school districts, most other school districts, your district does rely on an outside third party as capital assets management company to provide these reports. And every year the district will submit the capital assets updates, additions or purchases for the current year, as well as disposals for the current year. And then the capital asset management company would take the information and then generate a report for the district so that it can be utilized for the financial statements reporting purposes. So we, as part of our audit, we would review those reports and test some of the elements within the reports, as well as your district management's reconciliation process, okay, making sure that they are not just taking the reports and turn around and forwarding them to interested parties without reviewing them first. And also in the full accrual basis financial statements that were also required by GASB statement number 34, long-term liabilities have also been are also being presented, and we also look at and test those long-term liabilities numbers. In recent years, there are a couple of GASB accounting standards that require school districts to account for certain liabilities that you cannot fund for. Okay, most notably the OPEB liability, other post-employment benefits liability, and simply put, it's the actuarial value of health insurance for retirees, as well as your current employees that will become retirees someday. Okay, so that is a sizable number, and that amount is calculated by district appointed actuary every other year. Okay, the standard requires that a local government perform these full actuarial valuation every other year. And in the gap year, the actuary would use the data from the previous full valuation and then update the balance based on a number of factors, and primarily it's the interest rate or discount rate. Okay, so that's always an interesting report to read, especially when the amount of the liability is so sensitive to changes in interest rate. And with last year's audit, we saw a big swing in the number. The liability amount went up significantly. I think, if I remember correctly, about almost $33 million. Okay, and the big reason for that, and last year was actually a 2019-2020 fiscal year was the gap year, so which means it was an update from the previous valuation. So all the actuary did was use a different discount rate, the current discount rate in effect. They are required to use a certain benchmark. It's the 20-year municipal bond yield that are rated AA or better. Okay, and the GASB had put that requirement in to make sure that across the board, actuaries are not using wildly different discount rates, so that there is some comparability. So the 1920 fiscal year, we saw the discount rate went from 3.5% the previous fiscal year in the full valuation to 2.2%. So that was a big reason why the liability went up by that much. Now, this current fiscal year, June 30, 2021, it's the full valuation year. So I took a peek and I knew that the bond yield rate has already gone down again. It's now down to about 1.7%. And, of course, there are also other factors, healthcare trend rates. Being that this is a full valuation year, there's a chance that that could change as well. So I fully expect, just on the lower interest rate alone, I fully expect that this year's liability balance will once again go up. Okay. But, it is an accounting measure that's required by the GASB. The unfortunate thing is that it would present as such a large liability that on your full accrual basis financial statement, it would look as though you have a deficit, okay, a big deficit on a combined financial statement. But there's not much you can do, really. There's nothing you can do, really, because it is not a liability that you can fund for, even if you wanted to. If you have $200 million lying around and you want to pay for it and fund for it, New York State currently does not allow its local governments to fund for this type of liability. Okay, I often use the U.S. Postal Service as an example. Okay, that's the one liability that Congress has required the U.S. Postal Service to fund for currently, and that really, in my opinion, is why they have. There obviously a litany of issues with with the USPS, but having to actually fund for this humongous liability, that really for the U.S. Postal Service that's the primary reason, in my opinion, why they're in such dire straits. But it's every year as the number changes. If the bond yield somehow goes up to say 3.5%, your liability number might actually decrease. Okay, so similarly, you might remember the GASB also requires local governments to now pick up a piece of the ERS, the Employee Retirement System, and the TRS, the Teachers Retirement System, their relative net pension liability. So depending on the funding level of each of the systems, you have to, on this full accrual basis financial statement, also pick up a piece of that liability. And once again, interest rate plays a part in that, a discount rate. I remember the TRS when the standard first came out, requiring school districts to include those metrics on their financial statements. The Teachers Retirement System reported that they were about 101% funded, and so they have more assets than they do actuarially determined pension liability. As a result, this school districts actually got to recognize a net pension asset related to the TRS. But the ERS was about 95% funded, and therefore they had a liability. ERS, it has been more consistent year after year. They've been reporting fewer assets than they do liabilities. So you have been picking up and reporting your relative share of that liability. But for the TRS, the following year, they changed the discount rate. Okay, the discount rate that they used was supposed to reflect the earnings of their investments. So the next year, they lowered their discount rate. The lower the discount rate, the higher the liability. As a result, in year 2 of implementation, school districts went from having a net pension asset to having a net pension liability. Okay, so there's that swing. By year 3, things got better, and all of a sudden, TRS reported a net pension asset again. Okay, so you have that fluctuation on that full accrual basis financial statements, which the OPEB liability is also part of. So nevertheless, those are reports that your district will be receiving from outside parties, your own actuaries, as well as the Teachers Retirement System and the Employee Retirement System. When we receive those reports, we will go through them and look at the information and test some of the information presented to make sure that they are reasonable. Okay. And the substantive part, as I mentioned, will take place after the books are closed. And typically we would come in August, but because of some of the reports, we have to wait for them to become available. But usually we won't finish really that second part of the audit until well into September. Okay. After that, we can start the drafting of the financial statements, and which I described to you earlier. The process, we will be reviewing those draft financial statements with the business office, and then provide them to the audit committee prior to our exit meeting. Okay. The federal single audit reports at the last bullet on the page. Traditionally, it's not due 9 months after the close of the fiscal year, so usually it's March 31st. However, last year, this year, as well as next year, the federal government, because of the pandemic and the challenges that it posed to obviously everyone, but the federal government realized that it really poses a significant challenge to not only the entities receiving federal awards, but also auditors to be able to timely complete these single audits, and therefore they have provided a 6-month blanket extension. So now the due date is September 30th, 2022, okay, for your June 30th, 2021 federal single audit. Okay, I've given you some timeline here. I will be discussing the timing of the first phase, the audit planning and risk assessment phase and testing phase, with Olivia's office. The substantive phase, I expect to, just like in the previous 5 years, we'll start that part sometime in August. Presentation of the draft audit reports, I anticipate, once again, just like previous years, will be sometime between October and November, depending on everybody's availability. A couple of new accounting standards just to bring to your attention. The first one does become effective for this current fiscal year that we are going to be auditing. Statement number 84 deals with fiduciary activities, and GASB statement number 87 will not become effective until the next fiscal year, June 30, 2022 fiscal year. So it's here just really as for your information purposes. Okay. So talking about GASB 84, basically the GASB revisited the definition of what's considered a fiduciary activity. You may be familiar with within your accounting reporting system, there is something called a trust and agency fund. Okay, in the trust and agency fund, you have been accounting for student scholarships as a private purpose trust fund. The extra classroom activity funds, the student club money, that's also been accounted for in the agency fund, because these are student monies, right? And also payroll transactions historically have been the amounts, the payroll withholdings that are owed to the governments, federal and state governments, union dues and whatnot. Okay, those have been historically reported in the agency fund. But the GASB rethought that, and they have issued GASB 84, Statement 84, basically making local governments and school districts, look at these transactions, these so-called fiduciary activities, and to identify whether or not they truly are fiduciary in nature. Okay, and really the litmus test has to do with how much control and how involved an entity is with these transactions. Okay, with payroll withholdings, the GASB came right out and said, no, these payments are due to the federal and state governments, these withholding taxes. Yeah, the money belongs to the federal government, but ultimately it's your liability to make sure that you pay us, the governments. And therefore, the GASB said, well, we cannot account for these as agency fund fiduciary liabilities anymore. You need to account for them in a governmental fund. In other words, you have to report them in the general fund. And that's a simple switch because with the agency fund, it's assets offset by liabilities. So in terms of moving those payroll withholdings liabilities over to your general fund, you just have to move the asset as well. Okay. The more complicated ones really are the scholarship money as well as the ECAP or extra classroom monies. With the scholarship money, even though historically school districts have been reporting them as in a private purpose trust fund. Okay. But the reality is, if you think in terms of these scholarship money, how the memorial scholarships. Okay. In my 30-year career auditing school districts, I haven't seen a true trust arrangement for these scholarship money. In other words, they're not really legally protected from the school district's creditors. Without that legal trust arrangement, these scholarship monies really do not qualify as a true trust arrangement, and therefore, the GASB said you also have to account for them in a governmental fund. So the challenge becomes, okay, for your district, you have a little more than $160,000 in total scholarship money, at least as of June 30, 2020. Okay, so if you are to now move that money into the general fund, you also have to account for the transactions, okay, the receipts, donations, as well as interest earnings, and then the scholarship payout would all have to go through the general fund. And I know a lot of districts are concerned that it might, muddy up the water too much, and I agree with that. And so our firm's assessment is that with these scholarship money, school districts are better off setting up a new miscellaneous special revenue fund, which the State Comptroller's Office has recently issued a bunch of new account codes, including these special revenue funds, to help school districts set up these new funds. So you're going to see the scholarship money being accounted for. You're going to see new columns in your annual financial statements, as if there are not enough columns already. Okay, you're going to see a couple of additional columns with the scholarship money set up as a new fund. That way, it's clear. I know that it is of interest to users, to readers of the financial statements, and so that would be the best way to handle scholarship money. The extra classroom activity funds would be handled in a similar fashion. The primary, as I said, the litmus test really is how much control and involvement does the district have over the student club money. Now, although the students fundraise for their own clubs, and for the most part, they can decide on what they can use the money on. As you know, your district, the faculty advisors, the building principals, they are very much involved in terms of the actual transactions, the signing off on transactions, making sure that although they can spend it on whatever they want, that those purchases are still proper. Okay, so based on that, as well as the OSC's guidance, we believe that most districts will find that their ECAP activities really are not truly fiduciary because of that administrative involvement, and therefore, similar to the scholarship money, we also recommend that school districts set them up as a special revenue fund. Okay, so there are the two separate columns. Okay.
Alan?
Yes.
Your timing is almost perfect, but we're a little tight. So I want to give folks a chance to ask some questions.
Of course.
So if you can give us just the overview of the last GASB Standard 87,
Right.
the
GASB 87,
Yeah.
leases and primarily, lease, traditionally lease accounting, it's kind of off balance sheet. Okay. If you have an operating lease, if you lease copy machines, you pay for them annually and they're expended. And then in your financial statements, you disclose that you have lease obligations. Okay. And that's the extent of it. So GASB 87 really, this is, trying to really catch up with the FASB, which in the commercial world also have a similar accounting standard where they want the leases to be basically brought on the balance sheet to show that you have an obligation, okay? Even though you may not own the asset at the end, you have an asset that is the right to use this piece of equipment, and you have a liability or obligation that you have to pay the lease payment. So it's just financial reporting, and that's it. Doesn't really change how you would budget, okay? I mean, there might be changes in where you would code the payments, okay? Instead of, say, a 0.4 contractual code, you may have to now call it a principal and interest payment, okay? And so that's it in a nutshell. We'll go over that, of course, in more detail next year when it becomes effective.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As always, Alan, we really appreciate it. I want to quickly open it up to trustees or our Community representatives. Trustee Russo?
So on GASB 84, if we had chosen to put that money into the general fund, the scholarship money and the student activities, wouldn't that affect our 4% requirement? It would.
It will not, because the OSC has actually provided wisely a category called restricted other. Okay, and therefore, even though it's not a restricted reserve fund created by general municipal or allowed by general municipal law, because the use of those monies would be restricted for scholarship purposes as well as for student clubs purposes,
Right.
they are considered restricted fund balance that would not affect your 4% calculation. However, the reason why I would advocate using a separate fund rather than the general fund is because of the need to still track the earnings and the disbursements of each of the activity. So imagine if you have, let's say you have 20 scholarships, okay? You would have to have 20 or 21 interest earning subcodes in the general fund and 21 gift and donation subcodes within the general fund. Okay, I mean, you can do it. I mean, if you set up a new fund, you're still going to have to do that anyway. But it probably would be easier because when you look at the total financial statements, your interest earnings number, your gifts and donations number might be artificially higher than it truly is. If you have these student funds included in the general fund as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other members of the committee? Please. I'm just going to repeat the question real quick because you don't have a mic. Are there any other accounting rules from GASB of which we should be aware?
Not currently, because they have new standards also, but they don't really affect the school districts, and therefore, I don't want to list them there. You're welcome.
Thanks, Ray. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. I did have just one question for myself. This is kind of a basic question, just kind of a big picture, but reserves in general, you work with many different school districts.
Yes.
There's been a conversation here about reserves. Can you just sort of, for lack of a better way to ask it, plot us on the continuum of district approaches to reserves?
Okay. I can only speak of my own experience with my clients, and I do work with about anywhere from 15 to 18 school districts between audit and consulting engagement. So for the most part, in terms of reserves and fund balance in total, we often look at it or express it in as a percentage of total spending, total expenditures. And so over the course of doing these audits, really I do see a wide range of fund balance, some as low as maybe 7 or 8%. But those are the school districts that would be designated by the State Comptroller's Office as under fiscal stress or susceptible to fiscal stress. And on the high end, I have seen school districts, in Nassau County. Most of my clients are primarily in Nassau County, that were as high as almost 40%. Okay. So, I've been auditing your districts for 5 years now. And, I have seen, the total fund balance as a percentage of expenditures. I've seen it going down. And as of June 30, 2020, your total fund balance was about 24.5% of your total spending. So I would put you basically, right in the middle of the pack as far as, the clients that I deal with, as far as they're concerned. Okay, so a lot of districts are in the, 20 some odd percentage area.
Okay, so we're in the, again, we're in the fat part of the bell curve in terms of where districts generally are.
Right.
And 8% is about the threshold for when the state starts to say, you're a little tight.
It's actually 10%.
10%,
right.
okay.
So the state, when they came out with the fiscal stress scoring system, it's like golf. The more points you accumulate, the worse off you are. You want to be at par. You want to be zero, no score. Okay. But there are several benchmarks that the State Comptroller's Office uses, And I think every year, actually, you might, Peter and Olivia, you might receive a scorecard about specifically your district's performance in terms of fiscal stress scoring. So one of the benchmarks is your total fund balance as a percentage of expenses, okay? And they start accruing points or giving you a fiscal stress point when your fund balance is 10% or lower, okay? So I would see that as 10% as far as they're concerned is the floor. They want you to have at least 10% in total fund balance, including reserves, okay?
And the ones that are way past us at 40%, do they get dinged also on those scores?
They did.
Okay.
They did. Yeah.
Okay.
They did. Well, you know what? Because you know what? Actually, let me take a step back. They didn't get dinged in terms of the fund balance as a percentage of expenses, but they have other factors. You know that you know they may have got dinged when the state comptroller's office went in and did their you know financial performance audit. They would say you have too much fund balance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you want to be in the sweet spot.
Right.
Great. Other trustee questions or concerns? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Also, Ray and Katie. Sorry, Sarah.
You guys are good? Dave's question made me think of a general question too. You referred early on about sort of the limitations of the testing that you sample and you look at internal controls, but you're doing a sample. And that there was also a reference to sort of the claims audit. So as you well know, we have these 3 layers of auditing that go on. You do our external audit, but we have internal auditors and we have the claims auditor. And so early on, you referred to sort of the limits of what you're supposed to do because of these other areas. And then you also discussed sort of that you also do look, though, at the internal auditors and the claims auditors for what they found so that you have a more holistic picture. For people's general knowledge, would you mind explaining a little bit more about how these 3 layers work together for
Absolutely.
that comprehensive picture?
Sure, absolutely. And the 3 layers came about, the 3 different audit functions came about thanks to really Roslyn School District, right? And so the claims audit function, really their primary responsibility, the claims auditor's primary responsibility is the payment of claims, making sure that the district is dispersing district funds, you know, based on valid invoices, and that you know, based on valid purchase orders, and that you know they were the purchases were made in accordance with bids or quotes in accordance with each district's own purchasing policies and requirements. Okay, so their focus really is cash disbursements, vendor payments, if you would. Okay. It is a very nitty-gritty. Correct. Right. They didn't pay sales tax. Right. Exactly. You got it right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. So imagine each warrant, right? And some districts may have 2 warrants per month. Okay. And those warrants can be run, but the checks cannot be released until the claims auditors have reviewed every single claim voucher and sign off on them. Now, they might stamp every single voucher, or they might just stamp the entire warrant saying, yep, I've reviewed everything within this packet. Without that stamp of approval, the checks cannot be released, okay? So that's their primary function. The internal auditors, their focus is on your internal controls. They're not part of your internal controls, but they audit your internal controls to the degree that an external auditors would not get involved with. Because as external auditors, the focus is on your financial statements, your internal control over financial reporting. But the internal auditors' focus of your internal control systems could very well include not only financial reporting, but also other areas. Okay, so it may involve reviewing and testing overtime payments procedures. Okay, authorization for overtimes and how that is done, and their focus could be much closer to that of a forensic audit. Okay, in other words, they still perform sampling. Okay, and but then the focus of their internal audit would not just be on financial reporting. Okay, with the internal audit function, they are required to perform a risk assessment every year of various areas, and then they are required to come to the audit committee, present their recommendation to you, and tell you, okay, well, these are the 15 areas that we have assessed the risk on, and in their assessment, these are the from the high risk to the low risk areas, and also telling you these are the areas that we've tested in the past, or versus some of the areas that we have not tested in the past. And so we now recommend to you as the internal auditor, to the audit committee, that perhaps for this particular fiscal year, you might want us to test these areas. Okay. So their involvement, as I said earlier, we're only here a couple of times a year, right? A few weeks a year. Internal auditors, oftentimes, depending on what the audit committee would ask them to do, could be here 10 times a year.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we are going to move on to our public meeting. Alan, I say this every year, but there are people who are very good with numbers, and there are people who are good at explaining concepts. It's really, we appreciate that you could do both. So, thank you.
I appreciate that.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
very much.
Thank you, Alan.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time and attention. Do you need me to stick around, or?
No, you're obviously welcome, but we do not need that. Thank you.
Well, since I've read Dr. Dolan already, I'll bid farewell then.
All right, have a great night.
You
Stay
too.
home. Thank you. Ray, Katie, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Take care. All right, we'll just give, sorry, Betty, we'll give you 1 second to get settled there. Although we're going to have you standing up in a second because we're going to start with the pledge tonight. So if everyone please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we will move to the approval of our minutes. We have 4 meetings worth of minutes to approve. Is there a motion on approval of the minutes?
Motion.
Okay, Betty, you need a second? No problem. Okay, and I'm sorry, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on the approval of minutes from March 23rd, March 25th, March 31, or April 8th? Trustee Russo?
So I just wanted a clarification to the statement that was in minutes from our last meeting. Which was on my copy.
The last public meeting, March 25?
Yeah.
Okay.
March 25. Of course, I can't find my copy of them. I was printing out new copies. It's okay. There was I did, but my printer wouldn't print them, so I was working off the old ones. But and anyway, it doesn't matter. I just want to clarify. I don't think my question on the budget discussion was clear. Not that the minutes are wrong, but I don't think I was clear on my question looking back at it. My question was, we have numbers in the budget for the ERS and the TRS reserve where we've allocated funds in the monies that we are getting for the year. We also have ERS and TRS reserves. My question was specifically if we found ourselves short of funds, could we utilize the ERS and the TRS reserves for those expenditures that are in our budget rather than utilizing the monies that we've allocated? And I believe the answer was from Olivia that we couldn't do that because it would upset how we calculated the cap, because we'd be adding additional revenue to the budget that we didn't calculate for when we set the levy and the budget number and the tax cap. So that's not really the way it reads in there. It sounds like I was thinking you could use the money for anything. That's not what the question was. The question was much more specific than that. Yes. So I don't necessarily think that we need to change the minutes. I just wanted to clarify it in this minutes, in this meeting, that my question was much more specific than whether you could use, I wasn't asking if you could use restricted reserves for any purpose. I was asking, could we use the reserves in lieu of the money in the budget and then do a budget transfer for other expenditures from what we had allocated in the budget? And the answer is no, because I hadn't thought about when we do the calculation, you have to calculate the revenue, and it would also affect our calculation for the tax cap the following year. So that's really the answer, which I don't think is clear in here.
Okay.
I don't know that we have to change the minutes. I think I could just send you something for this meeting, right?
That's fine. And it's
Rather than monkeying with the minutes. I don't know that I want to.
I think
go
it's
through
fine,
all of
and we
that.
have it on record on
I
tape.
have it on recording, so I
tape, yeah.
just wanted to explain, that was my point.
Okay.
In the last meeting, not how we use restricted reserves.
Okay,
in
good.
general. Okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Other questions or comments on those minutes? Okay, all in favor of approval of the minutes as written? Aye. Thank you. We will now move on to a report from our superintendent, Dr. Girizzo.
Thank you. So welcome, everybody. The last time we were in this room together was last March, right? So that is that's quite something. It's really good to be back with all of you. We've been working on our budget discussions. They are underway. We are Olivia, myself, and Dave and Sarah have been to a couple of our tent talks that have been held out at the central office. Our next one is scheduled for Tuesday, the 26th, 6:30 p.m. Later in the our capital project work is underway. Phase 1 is those projects have been bid, awarded. Project meetings are beginning to take shape, and that work will begin in June. We are working through schematic design and design development for the phase 2 of the bond. And as we talked about, we had our bids came in under budget by $1.3 million on phase 1. So in our next meeting, Olivia and I will talk with you about potential projects, supplemental, how we might wish to use that money or not. One of them is related to science research. And so when we get to later in the meeting, you can give me some feedback on some of that. There is just on the financial side of the world, I've read some, just to clarify, misconception that might be out there in terms of budget status reports. The board, and Dave, if you want to jump in here, feel free to do so. The budget status reports are provided to the board monthly via the treasurer's report. And so that is something the board gets.
Yeah, it's pretty much a clear one sentence. It's a requirement, and we get them, and we review them as part of the treasury report, and we approve the treasury reports on a monthly basis, which of course is covered through our minutes and on tape.
Correct. Moving on to reopening. So we are scheduled to reopen on Monday, the 19th for seniors and juniors, and then the 26th for freshmen and sophomores. We had talked about that at our last meeting. Since that time, last Friday night, we got a communication from the Department of Health regarding the requirements that are related to reopening. And so there were a couple of key changes. The document is a little confusing. and contradictory, but a couple of the key changes were related to the plexiglass barriers. The CDC no longer recommends using them. The principals are working with starting to work with faculty and their parents to let them know that those are going to be coming down. The second piece of this is related to cohorting and 6 feet of social distance, and this is where it gets a little confusing. So in the document, it talks about how when high school students cannot be cohorted, that there should be physical distancing of at least 6 feet, which when you read that would preclude us from moving to the 3 feet that we had planned for next week. When you move further into the document, it says that it is a local decision. And you could make that determination to have 6 feet or less. I've confirmed with the Department of Health over the past few days that it is indeed a local decision, but any changes that we make to our reopening plan require feedback from our parents and our community members and teachers and local staff and departments of health. So where this is likely headed is in order for us to ultimately come to a decision point to, if we decide locally that we want to move to shorter physical distances as a local decision, then we need to have that be an interactive process in order to get there, which we will do. And we can talk about this later in the meeting and see where folks are with this. But that is likely to push our full reopening at the high school out probably if we go in that direction another week, right? So, and just rather than split the seniors and juniors for Monday, we might want to consider doing everybody on the 26th. So the full reopen would happen on the same timeline, but it just wouldn't be bifurcated in the same way. But we can talk about that a little bit later. Graduations and proms. So graduations, we have got great news that we can have an in-person graduation. There are some requirements around testing and capacity and where we will have so we're looking at options for where to have it. It'll likely be out on the field, not likely on the stadium because we have to look at the capacity of the different field spaces. So it's capped at 20% of the capacity. We're currently calculating that. We'd like to be able to offer a full in-person graduation to the entire class and offer 2 guests to each of our graduates. I'll get you questions when I wrap up. And if we are able to accomplish that, that's putting 750, 800 people in one spot at the same time. So we will work all of those issues out. With regard to proms can also move forward. There are testing requirements and there are attendance requirements about who can go and how many can go. And so Jen Imperial, Eric Contreras, and students and parents are working on making that plan. We have good news in athletics. So we have 4 conference championship teams already this year alone: women's tennis, men's cross country, women's cross country, men's soccer. If our football team wins on Saturday, or if Seaford loses, which both would be good options for us, we would have 5 conference championship teams this year, which frankly is remarkable. And I want to thank our coaches and our athletes and our boosters. Mike, I see you in the audience. Thank you very much. And we've had a really, really terrific reopening in athletics, and our athletes are out there having fun, performing at a high level, and having a great time. Last but not least, and I know we'll be taking this up in a little bit, so as the community knows, tonight the board will accept my resignation as your superintendent. And before we get to that point, I want to just very heartily and heartfeltfully, if that's a word, not really, but I'm going to say it anyway, maybe in a heartfelt way, that I want to thank the board for the opportunity to have led these fine schools. They are excellent, and I have been proud to do this work. My decision to go back to Westchester is one that's good for my family. Puts me a little bit closer to home. There's nothing else to it. You know, people have asked me what's going on, what's the story. There is no other story. It is an opportunity for me to get some more quality time with my boys, and that is that. So I thank you for 4 really good years, and I am thrilled to my core about the carrying it forward with your selection of an interim. So thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is my report.
Thank you. On that note, we are moving, the student government reps are not here, which is,
I have a comment.
Yeah.
That's your question.
Oh,
Yeah,
I apologize.
question. Have we thought for graduation? I know everyone likes to have it here, but moving it to something, let's say, like at Hofstra's Field or at football field or LIU, so that you could accommodate everyone and have seating where there's visibility for it. I mean, you know, Dr. Berliner is, you know, at Hofstra. I'm sure we have a connection there. And the other thought I was going to say to you was on the 3 feet. I know that Garden City moved that without any kind of consultation and before the guidelines change. So is there any structure, any guidance as to what kind of involvement and input we are required to get from the community? Because we don't obviously want to delay this too long, because we're right on the heels of AP, IB regions that, you know,
The
there's
main
no waiver.
Yeah, so I'll take the first thing, the first question first, right? So with graduation, we want what we will start with, because we'd like to be able to do it here.
Right, I agree.
So we want to assess what the capacity for people is out there. And then what I think will likely need to happen is we'll probably rent some bleachers. And we'll put bleachers out, not on the turf, right, on the turf stadium, but perhaps behind it. Exactly. And so we just need to figure out what is the physical capacity for people there, and then we can have 20% of that. Okay. We had a quadrant meeting today and we talked about this. I know a couple of districts are going, some bigger systems are going out to Hofstra, LIU, because the stadiums are enormous. And so they can bring, so a place that has 500-600 graduates needs seating for like 2,600. So that's, so we're going to see, we'd like to do it here. If we can't do it here, then we will explore options to do it outside and look at those costs for sure.
That's what Pitt is doing. Mikey's graduating
Yep.
in PNC Center.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
So we'd like to do it outside, and we'd like to do it once, right? So I know a lot of places are still doing them outside, but they're doing 2, 3, 4 of the same graduation by Alpha. We'd like to have everybody together. That's the goal. So that's question number 1. Question number 2, the hiccup around the reopening, because you're right, lots of places have been. They just did it. And so they've been back less than 6 feet for, the balance since
February, January,
some of them
February.
September, some of them in the county September. What we have in the guidance is from the CDC has 2 metrics that they want us to look at. One is around the positivity rate, and the 7-day positivity rate for us puts us in the low category, right? So if you look at the 7-day average for Nassau County, it's 3.4%. Yesterday was 2.8. I looked at this afternoon. So that puts us in the low. When you look at the community transmission rate, and you look at it at the county level, it puts the district in what is the high risk category. And what the CDC has written in the footnote is when you look at these two measures, you defer to the measure that is higher. So you can't, if one is low and one is high, you defer to the one that's high. So what I've been working on now locally, because I've been looking at our own local rates, and they're still, so if you look at the 6 communities we have, Greenvale, Old Brookville, Roslyn Harbor, Glen Head, Seacliff, Glenwood Landing, right? So when you look at those rates, the aggregate of those rates together are just like right above 100 per thousand. I think it's 1,000 or 100,000. I forget the exact number, but it was like 107 yesterday. So we're like right there at the local level. But the problem is because our population is not, small, that the numbers skew, reasonably quickly. So I do have confirmation from DOH that it is it's a local decision that we can make. I want to get your feedback a little bit later on that to see where you guys are in the direction that we'll take as a system moving forward. It's not going to take us long to get a lot of input, right? So, but we do have this obligation to have an interactive process in the way that we did in the fall, and we want to make sure that we are really carefully and thoughtfully and purposefully engaging with our teachers, because this impacts them, significantly. So, we want to make sure we have their voice in how we do this. So, Eric Contreras and I have talked about how to do it, and we can execute that pretty quickly. But we probably need more than tomorrow to do that.
Sarah, you have a question?
So I want to know the order of business. We don't normally have the discussion now. Are we
Right.
discussing the high school?
Well, you mentioned you were going to say it later.
Later?
Tell me what you're thinking about that, because it's not. I mean, obviously, it's unfolding.
I can do
literally
it.
in real time.
I'm happy to do it now. I'm happy to pick it up in old business later.
Let's do it now because people are watching.
I
or
think we
awake.
should do it now. I think it's a big discussion. We've already started. Let's do it.
Okay. What are your questions?
So I think, and we talked about this last time too, is the trade-offs that are involved, right? That the CDC and now the state has talked about that if you want to go to under 6 feet, that you have cohorting, but we don't have a way to cohort at the high school.
We
And
do
we
not.
talked about the limitations on if it's raining, that we don't have space for kids to eat where they can be spaced 6 feet apart. But I think the data on the transmission rate is interesting too, that it's high. Like the county's rate is substantially high. It's
294 is what I looked at this afternoon.
right. So it's basically nearly three times the level of what counts as high at the CDCs. If you're at 100, you're high, and we're about 3 times that. So
Right.
we've gotten used to it, but still on a national basis, it's considered high. But what I'm really thinking about is contact tracing will still be based on the 6 feet standard and the 15 minutes. So if you have a classroom where kids are 3 feet apart, if I test positive and there are 4 desks within 3 feet of me across my 9 different classes, one positive, right, can quarantine
A lot.
upwards
A
of
lot.
30 kids.
Yes.
And this past week, the week right after break, we had 9 positives at the high school, which was the week after break. And we know the week after break is high. So it won't be that high. We don't anticipate. But as we've talked about, you can have a positive every other day at the high school pretty routinely.
Right.
And so I'm concerned about everyone understanding that if we do this, we could have a whole lot of kids quarantined at really inconvenient moments, right? You could be home for 10 days right as we come up to prom or graduation or your AP or IB exam or whatever it is that's important to you. And it could be, and Mr. Contreras referred to this at the last meeting too, like there have been schools where it can rapidly become hundreds of kids that are quarantined because of those close contact rules. So I wanted to know if you had thoughts about how we weigh all of these things, like, because right now kids are not at the high school, not in school every day, but they come to school twice a week. And so
Right.
you jeopardize trying to get in every day versus potentially being home for 10 days.
For 10 days, right. And that is next to the import of the value of in-person instruction that just cannot be replicated online or in any way, shape, or form. That's the most impactful side effect of what will happen, right? So if we have, and that's something that we really worry about, and that is the phenomena that other places who have been less than 6 feet all year have really struggled with, is the quarantining. So when you have so right now when we identify a close contact, because we have really high mask compliance, and because we have high compliance with social distancing, rarely does it require quarantining of a class. Where you see classes quarantined is on, junky days like this, where kids have to eat inside or they have to have snack inside. And then that's where we tend to find more quarantining. But we have been, to your point, we have one or two cases. It's kind of leveled down. We had today, didn't have a chance to write the board, but today we had no cases. So that's twice this week. So it is definitely leveling off. But at the high school level, when we do have a case, it's going to take out the entire perimeter 6 feet of that student. And then if another student, let's say another student who might be on the periphery of that tests positive, who is in a close contact on Tuesday, but on Wednesday or Thursday tests positive, then we take out another whole section of that class. So you are absolutely right in that it will start to domino very quickly. And it's a worry that we have, and it's not something that we can necessarily accommodate for, right? Because it'll sort of be what it is as it happens. And as we go into the warmer weather, hopefully, hopefully the rates will continue to decrease as they are. But you're right, the transmission rates, they're holding, right? If you look at even when I talked with DOH yesterday, because I went through zip code by zip code with them on where we are. So the data that they had as of yesterday were 6 cases in Seacliff. Right now, 6 cases in Seacliff, you would say that's not a huge number.
I just want to clarify, that's the community, not the school.
Correct. Not Seacliff School. Thank you for Seacliff Village of Seacliff. So if we think about 6 within the population of Seacliff, it still is at 200, right, in the community transmission rate, which is high, right? If you look at a place like Greenvale, which if the rate is much lower, it's more like 66, 67, something like that. But that's because there are 2,000 people that live there, and there was like 1 or 2 cases, and Glenwood Landing had 0, right? So, that was good. So it is when you read the DOH guidance, they say ultimately the school district's decision to move to shorter physical distances will come down to a local community's risk tolerance based on its unique circumstances, and that is, that's the conversation, right? Is what is our risk tolerance for moving forward, and if if at some point in time we were to move forward, it's going to be hard to go back, obviously, but if we had to go back, we could always make that determination to, to pivot backwards, which sounds painful to say it.
It does. So you're talking about
Yeah.
the risk calculation about not just the risk of infection, but the risk, how much are you willing to risk your kid being quarantined for 10
Correct.
days, even if they're ultimately fine? Because the quarantine has
It's real.
yeah,
Yeah.
has an
it's real.
impact.
Yeah, and so so
Sure.
one of the things that we're thinking about that we have been talking through is, so graduation, high school graduation is planned for June 25, which is the Friday. So we've actually been talking about can we potentially have our last 2 days of school be remote, right? Just everybody remote, because that at least gets us to graduation without having to quarantine classes, right? And so that is, how do we, now that doesn't mean that someone is not going to become a close contact outside of school, but that I can't necessarily accommodate for. So there are these events that, that everybody's been looking forward to: graduations, proms, movie nights, this, that, pick one. And, the risk of a full return puts some of that in jeopardy. Now, maybe it will motivate people to be more diligent. I don't,
Get vaccinated.
get vaccinated.
16-year-olds can get the Pfizer.
They most certainly can. So there's a lot of factors that play into this.
Other thoughts from the trustees?
The quarantine rules are different if you're fully vaccinated, even for
That is correct.
schools and close
That
contacts.
is correct.
Okay.
Right,
Yep.
if you're fully vaccinated, if you're exposed, you do not have to quarantine.
Which will be tough because 16-year-olds had only opened up a week ago.
More or less. Right. I know.
It's only been a week, and it can only be Pfizer, so it's going to take 5 full weeks. So
Right.
people
Yeah.
gotta.
Yeah. So we're not there yet on that. And I know Pfizer just submitted emergency use authorization for 12 to 15-year-olds, which, if it's approved, will also probably make a very substantial.
You can get appointments very quickly for Pfizer, because I booked my son for when he comes home from college, and I could have booked him earlier. It's just that I had to wait for him to get home from Pittsburgh, because there's not enough time for him to get the vaccine at Pittsburgh and get the second shot. He's sort of in no man's land right now. But if people are interested, if you go on the New York State website, there are appointments available,
Yep.
and they'll tell you what vaccine is being administered at the site.
Like
Correct.
Jones Beach is
Jones Beach,
Pfizer.
the Javits
So-
Center, the Westchester County Center,
Mhm.
all those are Pfizer.
So we encourage everyone to get started because it's going to be 5 weeks from that first appointment till fully vaccinated.
Tim, do I see your button lit?
Yeah, I just had a question for Peter. You mentioned that Eric needed more than tomorrow to figure things out. What is he looking at? Just more creative use of space?
Well, we just have to meet with people, right? So we have to meet with teachers. We have to meet with parents. We have to. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to wait a week. Maybe it could be done Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Maybe we just push it out a couple of days. But before this week, there wasn't a requirement to have an interactive process. Now, we would always have an interactive process. We've met with our parents, we've met with we've spoken with our teachers, but we haven't done that since this guidance has come out. And so we want to make sure that we do that in a way that's compliant with the directions that have come out. Even the change of the physical barriers, that has to be communicated from K-8 to all the parents and the teachers as well, and the principals are starting to have those conversations now.
My only comment would be, just to remind what we saw a month ago, not the last meeting, the meeting before, about the effects that this pandemic is having on the social, emotional, and mental health of our students. And I do think it's very important that we get them back so they have that interaction that they've been missing. I mean, I just saw how isolating it was for my son, finishing college in his room junior year. And we saw all the evidence, and we're seeing behaviors at every level of the school that we haven't seen before. Part of that is the cohorting of the students in elementary and in middle school, and part of it is they just don't have that interaction. So I just think for everyone's health and well-being, as these numbers drop, we really need to get these kids back into school. They need that interaction, that human interaction, in particular for our juniors and seniors who are now, I mean, it's important for everyone, but our juniors and seniors who are, at the end of their years here at North Shore, they need to be in here, and they need to be in here with not just the people on the days, because that may not be their group that they hang with, right? And let's face it, they're socializing outside of here anyway. Not that that's an excuse for us not to follow the rules. It's not, but they're certainly not being exposed here. If they're testing positive, it's not from being in our schools. So the safest way we can do this to get them all back, let's do it as quickly as possible.
So
Oh, I was just going to say, I think we talked about talking to the parents and the teachers, but you must talk to the students because
Of course.
they're the ones who are going to lose their prom, their
Yeah, of
graduation,
course.
all these
Yeah, of
events. Also, I'm curious, is there a way to bring in more vaccinations to the community?
I would like to, right? So we are heavily dependent upon the allocation given to the provider. So we have that contract. Right now, the J&J is on pause. So that is that. But I expect that as soon as we can get, once that we can get through that hurdle, it went very smoothly the day that we offered it here. So I'd like to be able to do more of that. But the provider that we're using, the way it works is they get notified of the vaccine that they're being shipped and how many. And so we, and I know that that's happening all, but I would love to do more of it. And
Okay, and then my other
We'll work on
question,
it.
my
Yeah.
other question is, if a student is vaccinated, right, you're talking about the quarantine rules are different, but if you need to quarantine a class and people are vaccinated, are you going to have some still come to school, or the whole? Because that's something
Yeah,
that needs
that's
to be
a-
sorted out.
that's, yes. So yeah, we'll have to see. If what becomes really complicated is if the teacher
Right.
has to be, if the teacher has to be quarantined, right? So sometimes it's just easier to take it's easier, more efficient, and pedagogically more sound to take the whole class and have them pivot to home, because then everybody is getting the same lessons and methods and all of that.
So I think if we're engaging all these different stakeholders, the question is not just, do you want to come back to school? Or
No, it's how.
This
It's
is how
how.
it's laid out,
Yes.
and this is what it means.
Right, because remember in when we in the summer, because you were involved in a lot of these meetings with us, when we had the reopening meetings, they were all virtual, but we
Right.
went through the reopening plan. What we have to do now is talk to folks about, here are the changes in the reopening plan, and here's what it means. So we met on Tuesday as a leadership team. We went through technology, special ed, transportation, counseling. I don't have my notes. Pardon me? buildings and grounds, all of that, the cleaning, transport, everything to make sure that we had, all of our departments had readiness to be able to move forward, and they do. Now it's just an issue of really managing this the risk tolerance, right? So so can I make this work? I think yes, we can put this in place. We could make this work. We believe that we can do a good job to keep our kids and staff as safe as possible. But that does come with risk, right? Because that does come with reducing 6 feet to 3 feet and the contact tracing that's associated with that. And we very well may see more transmission. We'll know that pretty quickly because we monitor this daily. We may not, but I think that we have very, very talented, skilled teachers and administrators, and all of our support staff who know the protocols. So we know how to keep kids safe. We are concerned about lunch, right? And so Olivia and John Hall are working with our architects because we do need to get SED approval for it, which hopefully will not take a long time. But rather than have the tents that we have now, we would rent more substantial tents that are like you would see.
Like a wedding?
Yeah, kind of like a wedding tent where they're staked into the ground and tied down. And we would put one. The idea is that we would put one in the courtyard outside for lunch, and it would have sides, so that would help in the inclement weather. And then we would put another really big one right outside here by the one-room schoolhouse to get folks out. The other thing is that the board should know is that in terms of our ventilation efforts, so we talked about this at the safety committee meeting this week. 80% of the high school has been the filters have been balanced and are up and running. 100% of Glenwood Landing is balanced and ready to go. As of the other day, they had been working through the first floor of the Seacliff School. And so that is all coming together, but having 80% of the high school is a really important mitigating factor. And then so you'll see around you, just in preparing for tonight's meeting, we talked about how to make sure ventilation was in this room was good, because this room I think is one of the rooms that's not at MERV 13 yet. But we wanted to open so you see the windows are open. We worked with the mechanical engineer to identify how many HEPAs need to be in this room. So there are 8, and we moved them out of classrooms. So they were in here, I don't know, 2:30 or so today. They were running it sounded like an airport in here. They were running at high speed for a whole bunch of hours, and now I think they're running at the second level. I don't even think they're at the first. So you can sort of hear them humming a little bit. But it's not disruptive. If they're on that first level, you barely hear them at all. So that was that's also another key measure. We're still checking our CO2s every month. I have the CO2 meter here just in case I start talking too much and fill the. Trustee Jones has her own, but if you look at we are actually in our mitigation efforts, and it is true. We have been able to essentially replicate outdoor air inside the buildings, right? And that has been through just the HEPA filtration and through just these having windows open. So if you look at, if I took the measure now, it's probably in the 500 range, would be my guess. Where are we? So that's coming up.
Oh, it's absolutely fine, right?
Yep.
You would expect it to climb.
Yep. When I was in here by myself, when I first got here, it was at 441, right? So,
Right. And then through the audit, it moved up through the.
right. So we'll get to a point. So what it will maybe make for quicker meeting, right?
I was like, well, we could have a door.
Plus, we could, and and it'll make a difference. And then what we, so we pay attention to that. So that way, when we take kids out of the room, we turn the HEPAs up, they scrub the air, and then we bring kids back in. So we're on the front end of this. So any other questions that you have?
I would just say that, first of all, it should be noted that the relationship you've developed with the Department of Health is a real boon to the district. You can have these conversations and get this information, so I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
This conversation about risk is one we've been having since August or before, and it really governs all of these decisions. It's always a trade-off. It's always a risk cost benefit, and the risk is the unknown. That said, we are getting to the home stretch. We've come this far. I think that it's fair to say the concerns we have about less than 6 feet on April 19th are the same as if they would be on April 22 or April 26th.
Right.
That is going to be the concern for that going forward. So I think the conversations you have with all the direct stakeholders in the building are going to be important, but the degree to which you can convey, not that people are responsible for getting sick, but people are responsible for wearing masks and trying to get vaccinated and trying to be safe and trying not to have the kind of spreader events that we saw earlier in the year. I think there certainly is a movement, a larger movement in our community to feel like this is to some degree something that's behind us, and that is very dangerous. We're seeing that all over the place. So in those conversations, whenever you're able to do that, whether it is Monday or a few days after or a week later, the parents in that building have been so helpful and working so hard to create so many good things. I know they're invested in keeping the kids safe, but to convey that to the entire population is going to be a huge, huge part of it. And we are almost there.
Yes, we are almost there. So what we could probably do, and there is, in thinking through I want to consult with the high school team and certainly Chris and Olivia, but what we may want to think about doing is using Monday and Tuesday to do this work, this interactive process, but also would give us an opportunity to talk with both cohorts in smaller settings, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, and we could probably be ready to go on Wednesday, and maybe just take seniors and juniors, and instead of having them come back on Monday the 19th, have them come back on Wednesday the 21st, and then move forward with sophomores and freshmen as planned on the 26th. So we just kind of paused this a couple of days to get our plans zipped up and our communication strong. And honestly, when we talk with so many people, not only does that take time, but that also seeds us with new thoughts and ideas and different things that we may not have thought through. And I think that communication with our faculty will be really essential, because they will think of things invariably that we may not have thought of, and it would give us the time and space to be able to mitigate for concerns, because I want them to feel good about, and I want them to feel not only good about this, but I want them to feel like they have voice in the implementation of where we're going. So that might be, I want to talk with them, and I could let you know, but that does that sound like a reasonable?
I think reasonable is the word.
Yes,
Yeah.
it sounds like a great plan. And I just, if we can just make sure we're having conversations with people, not just about the risk of infection, but about the impact of quarantine, because whether we think it's reasonable or not, the Department of Health is going to tell us to quarantine all kids that were within 6 feet of a positive case for more than 15 minutes, which is everyone sitting around a kid in each of their 9 periods all day long. And it could be a lot of kids. And that'll be out of our hands once we make the decision to go closer than 6 feet.
Absolutely.
Unless that guidance eventually changes.
It's a constant state of flux, but right now we deal with the board as it's
But
positioned.
there's been the CDC has made no even rumor of that, right? And we already know that when they said, if you go less than 6 feet, you should cohort, and we're not doing that.
And I appreciate that you mentioned the teachers and the staff. The teachers have done, so much of the lion's share of this lift.
Amazing work.
It's
Amazing
important.
work.
It's important to recognize. Okay, trustees,
All right.
thank you. Thank you for giving us that, giving the public that information as well. This is a huge topic, and there's so much demand for this also. So I think it's important to be reasonable, as you said. With that, we will move on to the next stage in our regular business. Action A is acceptance of the resignation of our superintendent of schools, Dr. Girizzo. Is there a motion? And a second?
Second.
I was like, I want to.
The reluctant motions.
Nobody wants to.
We got it.
That's not a bad sign,
It's
right?
happening, guys. I had a couple things to say, but I wanted to ask if any other trustees wanted to say anything. Okay, Betty, if you don't mind, I'm going to read this into the record, and I'm going to read it into the record, but I'll email you later. So there are going to be other moments to reflect on this and to thank Dr. Girizzo for his contributions to North Shore. So I'll be short, but I did want to say a couple words now. It's fitting. This is our first day back in this library for meetings, as it was this very same room. You were appointed superintendent in February of 2017 after a very thorough search driven by the community as a whole and tremendous community input. It was my first year as a trustee, and I remember President Tony Labate highlighting Dr. Girizzo's focus on the whole child, your commitment to all students inside and outside the classroom, your dedication to continuous improvement, collaborative leadership, financial foresight, and staying in front of the ever-changing landscape of public education. And that was read into the minutes too. So I remember it, but I also had a peek with the help of Ms. Campy. These 3 years went very fast, and North Shore is a better place for your time here, Peter. You've left your mark with important administrative appointments, creation of our strategic plan, and of course, as we're talking here, the successful and continuing response to the pandemic. One of the only Long Island schools to be open full-time since September, K through 8. The attention to air quality, robust outdoor learning, keeping our student athletes playing, our artists performing, and prioritizing wellness and engagement for all of our students and faculty and staff. I remember those early days of the school year myself, just driving past some of those schools and seeing the elementary kids on their little carpets outside, seeing the high school musicians playing out front. It's just been in a very dark time. It was a ray of light, and it was important, and it meant a lot to a lot of people. To the community, as we look forward to another superintendent search, which will again be driven by the input of our amazing and diverse community, I am absolutely certain and appreciative and thankful that this board is more than up to the task. I know Peter is committed to a smooth transition. I know he's excited to see this incredibly challenging school year to its conclusion with these classes and these parents that you've worked so closely with. And of course, we all wish you the best. On a very personal note, I'm not going to be working with you too much longer, but we have certainly crafted a friendship, Peter, that's going to last well beyond your time here. So I thank you, Peter. Yeah. I did want to give other trustees the time to say something, but I also would be ready to call the vote on acceptance if, okay, with that, all in favor of a acceptance of Dr. Peter Girizzo's resignation, say aye.
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 Thank you. And, sorry, continuing with a bit of a roller coaster of emotions here, we're moving on to a very positive thing. So I got to say, we'll take action B, which is the approval of a resolution regarding the appointment of our interim superintendent of schools, Dr. Thomas Dolan. Is there a motion
Motion.
and a second? Oh,
Second.
everyone's much more excited to go to seconds on the on this one.
This is much easier.
This is much easier. And exciting. And I did also, Betty, I wrote something here I'd like to read in. So on behalf of the Board of Education, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Thomas Dolan as our interim superintendent for 21-22 school year. We know you are going to be a great addition to North Shore, and you're going to keep us on our path of growth and success. And if you don't mind, I'm going to just introduce you by saying a few, well, more than a few. I have a couple things to say about you. You have a good background. I want to share it with everyone. And I want to start by the fact that your career began in the classroom as a high school social studies teacher for over a decade. It's so important to us here in North Shore. Teaching and learning is the center of our mission and everything we do. You then gained administrative experience as a dean of students in Hewlett High School, director of personnel and assistant to the superintendent in Sewanaka, which of course prepared you for your first building leader position, principal of the Cary Junior Senior High School in Franklin Square for 6 years. Dr. Dolan moved over to Manhasset School District as the assistant superintendent for personnel, served as the superintendent of the Franklin Square Elementary School District before moving on to become the superintendent of the Great Neck Schools, student body of 6,700 students, 2 high schools, and of course a reputation for excellence, which continues. Dr. Dolan retired in 2015, which doesn't really seem like you have a great sense of that word, because here you are, and of course the other things you've done as well. Because literally weeks after your retirement from there, you accepted a position as the interim president of Nassau Community. My wife, who is here tonight, is a professor and a counselor at Nassau, so I know the school well, and I will just say unequivocally, it is not an easy job that you took, but you quickly earned the trust of faculty and students by being the person everyone who meets you quickly understands. You're kind, you're smart, you're honest, you speak from the heart, Tom, and you're an educator to your core. You're invested in the success of all of our learners, and that is part of what makes you such a great fit for North Shore, because you share the values that we share as a community and as a school district. Dr. Dolan has also served as the acting and interim director of the Locust Valley School District last school year, which of course gave him experience dealing with the pandemic, but also the experience of running a school district while their board conducted a search for a full-time superintendent, which is very analogous to what we'll be doing here in North Shore. The board very much looks forward next school year to developing our leadership profile and working with a search firm with the input of our entire community to hire a permanent superintendent. But I want to be very clear, Dr. Dolan is not here to be a caretaker. This is not going to be a year of running in place. We are looking to see you continue to grow our schools, set lofty goals, communicate with the community, and develop and strengthen the whole North Shore team. Just to round out what you do, Tom, you're a board member in the Cradle of Aviation Museum, the Harry Chapin Foundation. You worked through St. John's to open a graduate center in Hauppauge to build doctoral student cohorts. And as if that isn't enough, you're also a professional baseball umpire at the collegiate and high school level, which I will not go further than to say I'm sure there are parts of that you will be able to apply to your role as a superintendent. And of course, as I said earlier, Dr. Drizzo will be with us through the end of the year, but he and you have already had conversations about this transition. We're very lucky to have both of your professionalism on both sides of this handoff. And so it brings me a tremendous amount of joy to welcome you to the district. Are there any other trustees before I call the vote have any questions? Or okay, I know Dr. Dolan wanted to say a few words, but I think we'll take the vote first, and then be happy to hand the mic. So at that point, I'd like to call the vote. All those in favor of approving Dr. Tom Dolan as our interim superintendent?
Aye.
Aye. Terrific. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. I promise I'll be brief. I am honored, I am humbled, and I am just so excited to get started. I've known the North Shore School District for a long time. I've known it well for at least 30 years. And I've done a lot more research in the last 2 weeks to learn even more about it. And every time I look at that webpage, which I've been living on, I'm in awe. There are wonderful, wonderful things going on here. The word opportunity just leaps out every time that I look at it. And I can't wait to add a little bit to that and work with some new colleagues. I know the transition is going to be successful because of the support I already sense from the board. And also, and this is kind of unique, the fact that I'm working with someone who's been my friend for 20 years, my friend and colleague for 20 years. Peter and I know each other well. We've already begun that conversation, and I know the transition is going to be a smooth one. I'm certain it is, but I'm very anxious to get that started and anxious to get underway. I also have one, if you'll indulge me for one last thing, there's something I get to do tonight that people don't get to do very often, and that is thank the person who really supports me all the time when I'm not at board meetings, and that's my wife, Karen, who's here tonight. From high school on, she has been my support, believe it or not. So thank you very much. I can't wait. I'm not doing anything for the next couple of months, so I know I'll be busy working with Peter, and I'm just so anxious for July 1st to arrive and to hit the ground with both feet running. I thank the board and the community very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, we will move on to a much less emotional part of the meeting, which is our discussion C, our policy review. Is there a motion? Thank you. And a second?
Second.
I guess we're not really acting, but we're opening it up, but let's go. I don't know who's running the policy discussion today. All right. Thanks, Tim.
It's been a while since we met. I guess it was early March, I think we met and discussed these policies. But the policies that we're discussing tonight are the equal opportunity policy and regulation. And I think everybody's received the updates on that. But the equal opportunity policy, which we're now changing the title to non-discrimination and equal opportunity, addresses 4 issues. First, it offers a blanket notice of non-discrimination of all legally protected classes. Secondly, it addresses public notification requirements. Third, it sets up a grievance procedure for allegations of violations of civil rights. And fourth, it addresses website accessibility for persons with disabilities. So the language is recommended by NISBA. And so you can see the changes to our own policy that we've had for a number of years.
Okay. Are there trustee questions or comments on this policy? No, sorry. I want to give everyone a chance, but I did have one myself. Thank you to the policy committee, of course. I was just curious, in paragraph 1 on page 1, and then the paragraph below the bullet points, they're kind of covering the same classes that are being discussed here, but they're not exactly the same. I wondered if there was a reason why they were a little separate, or if it might make more sense to kind of list them once and then just refer to as in paragraph 1, because there are different, the different non-discriminatory classes are not really exactly the same in every area. And so that seemed, if there was a reason for it, or if it's just that it's different.
I mean, it's just following the NISBA language.
Okay.
In their structure of the policy.
Okay. And the attorneys have seen it and approve it?
Yep.
As long as it covers everything properly. It seemed odd to me that they would list different things at different places, but if that's the way that it is and it's been approved, obviously, by the NISBA attorneys and ours, I'm comfortable proceeding.
Yeah, and what we'll do is, to that point, we'll just, we'll take that question. I'll talk to James before, because we have a policy, our next policy meeting is on Monday.
Okay.
Tuesday. I've been saying Monday all day. I know. Okay. So our next policy meeting is, I was so anxious to see you for policy that I wanted it to be Monday, right? But on Tuesday, we'll go over this one. We'll have a conversation about that. The other policy that I meant to put on the as a discussion item, because I had written to you about it, was the poll watching policy. So that didn't make it to the agenda, so we can't necessarily discuss it tonight. The board has it. If there's any feedback you want to give me on that policy before we meet, we can take that, and we could have that be, do the review and then also have it approved on May 6th if we wanted to do that. Okay, Sarah, I'm sorry.
Do you want to, I wasn't clear. Should we email you if we have things
Okay.
about poll watching, or do you want to try to discuss it since we did see it?
It's up to you, either way.
If you have
No, we
Present.
have it for the
It-
meeting, like written.
Yeah, we had it as part of our backup. So if you have a comment, you can certainly share it now. I think if the policy committee is meeting on Tuesday, if you would like to go,
Incorporate it.
you can incorporate it. And you can also, if you're not either ready now or something occurs to you over the weekend on a third or fourth reading, you can always email them additionally, but try to do it by Monday.
So I did look at it, but it wasn't on the agenda, so I didn't look at it again today. But I would say in general, my impression was it was more restrictive than we needed it to be, and it was more restrictive than policies that people in the community might be used to, say like at a village election. So it says you can only have 2 poll watchers, but our election day is extremely long, which is terrific, right? More people can vote. But I think it means you want to allow more poll watchers. I didn't know, so we required the list of poll watchers on like the Friday before the election. I didn't know how important that was to know that far in advance. There could be a logistical reason for that, but if not, then more open is better, because the poll watchers, the language of the rest of the policy is that they're in a restricted area. What they can do is by definition not disruptive. So I think being able to set up poll watchers later, being able to have more poll watchers would be more in line with what people are accustomed to, and I can't see any reason not to be more open with it. I think at the last village election, poll watchers were even changing every hour because people worked, and we're trying to help. And there may have been something else, but that's what struck me most, was to be as accommodating as we could and still be able to run the election, in a smooth, clean, open fashion.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
Feedback. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you very much.
great. So we're set with the policy?
We are.
Thank you again to the policy committee. We now move on to comments from the public. This is our first live meeting back, as has been mentioned. So for this week only, we did allow folks to email. No one did, although there was one that was a holdover from the previous week, so I'll read that at the end of live. But at this point, if you are here, please step to the podium. I would just say this, give some space to the person at the podium if you're going to be in line. But just say your name, town of residence, and please share your thoughts if you have them. Okay, yep, please. And Mike, you might be a little on the taller side of that mic, so just,
Okay. How's that?
that's great. Thank you.
Mike Conklin, Greenvale. I'm the president of the North Shore Booster Club. Superintendent Giarrizzo, Board of Ed, I'm here on behalf of all who are proud to call themselves North Shore Viking fans. I wish to thank the superintendent and the board for putting forth the Athletics Reserve Fund initiative, and I look forward to the vote. I can honestly say my prior interactions with you haven't been to say thank you. They were more to express my displeasure with your decisions to let a coach go or to drop the lighting from the funding from the bond issue very late in the game. Your job is a thankless one, and your decisions are criticized from multiple directions. My focus is very pointed, and athletics is where it's at. I thank you for the live streaming that we have out on the field. Your focus has to be much wider, as you have a myriad of issues to deal with, not just the ones I focus on. Your answer to many, not just me. You answer to many, not just me. One thing I've learned in the last couple of years is your job is far from easy, and you are definitely underappreciated. Superintendent Giarrizzo, thank you for your guidance these past 4 years. Dr. Dolan, I welcome you to North Shore and look forward to talking Viking sports with you. As a parent of 4 and a taxpayer in this district for the past 15 years, I appreciate the updates being conveyed that clear up some misinformation being distributed. I am very confident all of you represent the North Shore community proudly and honestly, and have the best interest of our children as the #1 priority. Lastly, I would like to publicly apologize for all those who were disgusted by the actions of a few toward Mrs. Campy. Her dedication to this community and district is unparalleled, and I apologize on the behalf of many. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
I'm not as tall. Paul
It's flexible.
Pasculgian from Glen Head. I wanted to comment on an email that superintendent and the Board of Ed sent out to the community from the district lawyers regarding the directory information that was sent to the union president. Your email stated that the information was unlawfully provided to the union president and not to a Seacliff resident because of a change in the law on August 5th, 2020. That you were obligated to provide the information to the union president, but not to the resident because the Seacliff resident's FOIL came in after August 5th, 2020. Greg's Perlis request for directory information was granted on June 2nd, 2020, and he was provided the names, addresses, and phone numbers for every parent, for every child in the school district to advocate for the budget vote. However, I requested directory information on June 25th, 2020, well before that August 5th date that you guys say the law changed. And you told me it was a violation of law to provide that information to me. If it was a violation to provide it to me, it was a violation to provide it to the union president. As you know, this past June, budget vote was absentee ballot. The election was done by mail, and ballots were sent out at the end of May, returned by June 16th. After the union president received the names, addresses, and phone numbers of every parent of every student in the district on June 2nd, he then, on June 3rd, asked for the names of every voter who voted so far in the election. His request went to the district clerk at 7:20 in the morning, and the district clerk provided the names of every voter who voted to him by 10:13 in the morning, approximately 2,700 names and addresses. Then on June 8th at 8:39 a.m., the union president again asked the names of every voter who voted in the election so far. The district clerk provided him the names and addresses for every voter. By the end of the day, approximately 4,500 names and addresses. There's clear coordination between the district and the union. Needs to stop. Andrea, Rich, you guys.
We're not, sorry, you're not going to officially sit here and attack individual trustees, especially one who
Okay.
wasn't here.
Fine. Campaign
I
contributions.
didn't mean to make that quite so loud.
Campaign contributions were taken from board trustees in the election, and board trustees also asked for voter information. One trustee, former president, asked for voter information and was provided that information on May 29th. One trustee who ran in the last election asked for voter information 4 times on June 2nd, June 4th, June 5th, and June 9th. You know, this has got to stop. You know, the coordination with the union, providing information so that you can target particular voters is not appropriate, right? It's cheating. What's going on is cheating. I'm not sure if that's what we teach the kids in school here, to cheat, but that's what's going on. It's cheating. It's got to stop. So I'm going to ask you tonight, for the next election and for future elections, are you going to allow these tactics to occur? Because they shouldn't.
So I would say this very briefly. This board stands behind the integrity and the legality of every aspect of the 2020 election, period. If you want to talk about coordination, you want to talk about collusion, you want to make, this is loud, you want to make those allegations, that certainly is your prerogative to make those assumptions and beliefs. This is an open mic and people can come here and speak as they see fit. That said, it is the position of this board that the law was followed. It is the position of our attorneys who have advised us that the law was followed.
Okay.
And
You know, what's going on is unethical. Forget about the law. If a kid cheats on a test, is it unlawful for a kid to cheat on a test?
again, there is
No.
no admission, Paul, or
Okay.
belief that there has been cheating in
There's
this
cheating
election.
going on.
I mean, there's no reason to go back and forth. You've made your point. I've made mine. I absolutely appreciate you coming here and sharing what you have to say, and I hope you can respect that I strongly disagree. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Janine Feuerborn. I live in Glen Head. I'm here as a representative of the North Shore SEPTA organization, which is the Special Education Parent Teacher Association. I'm a little nervous. So we would just like to present our view concerning with regards to the elimination or the proposed elimination of the Assistant Director of Special Education for elementary level. So we believe North Shore, or I should say North Shore SEPTA has communications with administration frequently, and we were led to believe that the district was still looking to fulfill this position and that North Shore SEPTA was not informed in good faith. North Shore SEPTA has had a voice at the table for alongside administrators, faculty, parents, and sometimes students for the hiring of the administrators district-wide. And so it is extremely disappointing and concerning that an elimination of a position, especially one within the special education department, that SEPTA did not receive any courtesy or consideration regarding the elimination of this position, and especially also for the families that we represent and that use the resources of this special education administrator. This decision presents as impulsive to make it without receiving any data, without reviewing any data, without having a comprehensive restructuring plan, without having an evaluation of the burden of the responsibilities that will fall on positions surrounding the Assistant Director of Special Education for elementary. And so North Shore SEPTA just requests that this decision not be made without the transparency of this data and without the input from all the stakeholders. And we hope that this decision will reflect or be able to have a positive outcome this year. Otherwise, Dr. Dolan, we will be seeing a lot of you next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janine. I realize I used to speak at that mic before I got more comfortable speaking at the mic, but I've been hearing you speak publicly for years now. Since you organized that you got us all into Star Wars. I remember that well. So we appreciate your input, and I think that's very well taken. Thank you.
Hello, Roger Friedman, Seacliff. I just want to say thank you very much to Dr. Giarrizzo and to the board. This community owes you a huge debt of gratitude for your service. There is a faction in this community that as of late has been putting out facts and figures without regard to whether or not they are factual. Whenever I've looked into it personally, pretty much any of their information, whether it has to do with reserve fund balances or underspend on the budget, any number you look into, or that the budget status reports don't exist, anything has been false information. And I would just like to say that it's easy to come up and make allegations and put it out in the community. And we should all remember that a lie travels halfway around the world before the truth has time to put its pants on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger.
Jerry Romano, Seacliff. Good evening. It's glad to see that things are trying to get back to normal again for all of us, not just the students, which is, I'm sure they're anxious to get back in school. I sent the board, the president, and the clerk an email earlier electronically because I didn't think it was appropriate to hand out paper. And it's a petition to return surplus funds and reduce property taxes with those funds. I won't read the whole thing, but just to give the people here a sense of what it's about. It's we, the taxpayers of the North Shore Central School District, request that the Board of Education reduce the following reserves and return the below funds to the taxpayers in the form of a tax reduction in the 21-22 budget. Some of the funds I'm talking about were established in 1998, have well over $1 million in them, never been used. I'm not sure what the purpose of something would be for having $1 million something or $2 million sitting somewhere for 23 years and never used. But all I know is if I was running a business and I needed that cash, I probably wouldn't have it sitting there for 20 something years. And I just don't know what the justification of it is. It's like the Employee Retirement Contribution Reserve, which is a contingency account to pay the bill from New York State in case it comes in higher than what you had already budgeted. The bill is usually about $1.6 million, and you have $5, $6, $9 million, depending on what year it is, in that account to pay a $1.6 million bill, which is usually over budgeted by a couple $100,000. It's over budgeted. You've never, ever, ever used the money in that fund to have to pay a bill that came in greater than what you had budgeted. And the money needs to be returned to us. These are difficult times. You only have to know, if you take a look at any of the real estate websites, see how many houses are being foreclosed on in this area, and you'll get a sense of what's going on. Take a moment and do that. And maybe you might want to call those people and tell them why you need millions of dollars of our money and not be using it. And don't start with the whole stabilization fund, Dave. It's a fabrication. The only time there's a real stabilization fund that the New York State Education Department allows is when a major piece of property has been sold. And that money can be played out over 10 years. Otherwise, there's no such a thing. All right? And I don't want to hear about the LIPA plant either. That's been closing for 10 years, and it'll be another 10 years before we feel the impact of the taxes going away on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Jerry, did you want to submit the petition to the clerk?
I didn't know if you wanted me to hand out paper or not.
Just leave, if you would, just leave it on that desk right
Sure.
there. Thank you. Okay. Other comments from the public?
I just have one more.
Paul, we have someone else, and we can come back to you.
You want to go, Greg? So tonight, there's a budget transfer in the minutes or in the agenda for the meeting. Do you guys have the budget status report here that we could look at?
The board receives the budget status report monthly with our treasurer's reports.
Okay, show of hands of which trustees have reviewed the legally required document that the New York State Education Department requires, the budget status report.
So Paul, again, I appreciate the question. The trustees are not compelled to, respond in that way, but I'll tell you, I do. I approve it. You see me on tape.
Okay.
Every month we approve it.
Other trustees?
Again, I understand the nature of the question. I understand you want it to be a Q&A. Public comment is not a Q&A. It's not a town hall, but it is an opportunity for you to share your thoughts with us, which I would encourage you to continue.
Okay. So at the end of this meeting, can we get a copy of the budget status report?
We do not put that out there. It's got not personal, but it's got private account and banking information. It's not suitable for that kind of public display.
When I read the requirements of the budget status report, there's nothing in there that says anything about specific accounts. It's just a revenue, estimated revenues, amount of revenues received to date, overages and deficiencies, revenues estimated to be received during the balance of the year, original appropriations, transfers or adjustments, revised appropriations, expenditures to date, outstanding encumbrances, unencumbered balances. Doesn't sound to me like there'd be a lot of banking information in there. If the New York State Board of Education, Commissioner of Education requires this report to be produced, how come you guys can't produce it?
Again, we do produce it every month, and we
Okay,
all
then-
view it.
Then I want to see it. How
That's
do I get it?
That's different. That's different. There
Oh,
are things
well.
that boards see that have financial information in there. We share
Listen,
a ton of
I
stuff.
pay the taxes here. I want to see it.
I understand.
Hi, Greg Perlis, President, North Shore Schools Federated Employees. I just want to clarify some of the misinformation that's been routinely bandied about in the community recently and during this meeting this evening. First of all, the FOIL requests. I don't get this very often. There's been a request that I get louder. So first of all, those FOIL requests, they were properly executed. They were within the scope of the law. The Federation's request was vetted by council. The Federation, that's the union, we're popular these days. The Federation submitted a certification assuring that our purpose was neither to solicit nor to fundraise. We submitted that certificate. That affidavit was truthful. It was never violated. The FOIL request was for the names and addresses of families legally in pursuit of a get out the vote effort that we are proud to have undertaken. There was no request for the names of children. FERPA ensures that students' educational records remain private. There was neither an inquiry nor an interest in educational records. By law, unions are free to engage in political speech, in political assembly, in voter advocacy, candidate endorsement, budget endorsement, and that's what we did. When we did it, our mailings and our emails were conducted entirely through NYSET and NSS-FE databanks and resources. We coordinated our political action through the Nassau Regional Office of the NYSET statewide union in partnership with the regional political organizer out of the Nassau Regional Office for NYSET. There were no district resources used, no facilities, no information. And the FOIL requests about which questions were raised a few minutes ago, they are routine, they are legal, and they are universally available to any member of the voting public. To suggest collusion or inside play is deliberately misleading. Those legalities are important. And as president of the Federation, I'm highly mindful of our union's obligation to be both ethical and legal in our conduct. We have been, we are, we will be. And having addressed those legalities, I just want to close on a couple of more affective and qualitative fronts. First of all, feelings aren't facts. Rage is not an argument. Charges can be loud, they can be reckless, they can be deliberately misleading, they can be needlessly belligerent, but none of those things makes them true. What is true is that one side of the rift that seems to have emerged in this community, and I've spent a quarter century of my life in this community, and I'm sad about it. But what is true is that on one side of this rift that seems to have been emerged, is a group that attacks teachers, attacks me, attacks the union, attacks you, attacks the superintendent, attacks the schools, attacks the budget. And there's one side, and the union is proud to be on this side, that supports kids, supports teachers, supports schools, supports this community. It's a choice that we've made. It's a choice that we're proud of. It's a choice that we're going to make again. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I just want to clarify real quick. Sorry. You said you were here for 25 years and you were sad about it. You meant sad about the rift, not sad about being here for 25 years. All right. Thank you.
after Paul and Jerry got up and spoke, I was going to say I rest my case. But I would just like to say that the record should show for the community at large that they were not interested in hearing Greg's point and left the room. In addition, Paul is definitely aware, because I've had communication with him, to this fact that the budget status report exists, and Olivia has offered to show it to anybody in the community who wants to see it, but it's not made public because of bank statements and other information that it contains. Thank you.
Thanks. So, any other comments from the public tonight? You have your strike and ball counter here with you tonight? I umpired when I was a little kid, and it lasted a season, so good for you. Okay, with that.
You had one comment that you said was emailed that you
Oh,
wanted to read.
thank you. This is from a gentleman named Reverend Frederick Grant from Glenwood Landing, and he asks, how is it that such an affluent district fails our community's most vulnerable? I recently spoke with our current superintendent regarding a transportation issue for my child. In denying my request, he intimated that if I was to allow my child to be IEP'd, then a bus may be provided. This is a practice designed to work for a small majority of students with alternative options. However, when applied to the most vulnerable, robs the individual of an opportunity to succeed in life past high school. When I explained this in conversation, it was said that that is what the voters want, or was what the voters want. I'm a current voting active Republican, and I can honestly say that does not represent my position. My party votes and puts people in power to ensure the safety and prosperity of our community. How will we ensure that our children's best interest in education are met in this current racial climate, protected by those responsible for caring for our children? So, again, Mr. Grant is not here, but it sounds like a transportation issue, which the board has certainly received transportation requests and comments in the time here, and it is tough. We all sat here years ago when I don't know if ever here was on the board, and someone stood at that podium and talked about, kids waiting for a bus on Glen Cove Road, and it's very difficult in these situations. However, I'll let Dr. DeRizzo talk about it, but it is, of course, a completely regulated area, of which there's really no discretion.
No. So the transportation limits are set by the board, approved by the community, and in North Shore, it is 3/4 of a mile K through 12. And so a request was made for transportation within that limit, and where those limits can be accommodated for is if a student has special needs, and we need to accommodate them for transportation. Outside of that, there is no other mechanism to alter the transportation limits. And so in this case, it came from a place of inquiry, not advocacy for a solution one way or the other. So, but the 0.75 limit is the 0.75 limit, and it is really frustrating. Olivia and Michelle Hall will actually go out with the counter. They will walk from the flagpole to the person's house. And unfortunately, there are times when that 0.7 mile limit, they are within a foot or two of the limit, and we just can't approve it because it's not authorized for us to approve it. And it's incredibly frustrating. We really do understand it.
My wife is here, so we were just like a few feet short for our kids getting busing before they changed the limits. And she was like, can't you? I said, I'm not going to ask Olivia. I'm on the board. I'm not going to do it. But also because she's right. So we didn't do that. The only other thing I would say is that it should at least be mentioned that students don't get IEPs to get qualified for busing. Like, IEPs are given for the best interest of the students. This district, your points are obviously well taken earlier, but this district is committed to seeing all of our students succeed and getting what they need. And it's not a quickie gateway to get a shorter transportation limit. Although I understand, and I think one of the things tonight is we do have a variety of opinions and thoughts in this community, and everyone is welcome to speak and share what they have to say at the podium. I wish there was a way for us all to be able to come together more, and we certainly are striving to work for that. But as it is, we are an open forum. We like hearing what people have to say, even if it's not necessarily always, in exactly the format that might be most pleasant. But it's important, and it's part of our democracy. And I'm glad that people are here to contribute. So I thank you. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad for everyone who's watching. I'm looking at the recording device right now. But if there are no more comments to the public, we will move on with the action portion of our business meeting. Okay, thank you. I will ask for a motion on action D, which is personnel. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. A second. Thank you. Any questions or comments on personnel? Trustee Russo?
Two things. There is a resignation that is effective May 6th. We are looking for a replacement for that spot, so I don't want people to think that their child is not going to get instruction. Second thing, there's an extension of probationary probationary period. I just want to make clear that during that probationary period, tenure can be granted, which is the point of extending it, so that the public is aware of that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on or comments on personnel? Okay, all in favor of approving action D? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you. Action E is approval of budget transfers. This is in the amount of $393,377 to cover legal fees for split properties, energy performance contracts, service provider contracts, FOIL requests, election appeal, high school track warranty issues, video production for board meetings, additional student for St. Christopher's, and the cost of regular teachers coverage at the middle school. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second? Thank you. Questions or comments on this? Trustee McCary?
Yeah, we had spoken previously about breaking this down in the agenda. $400,000, close to $400,000 is a large budget transfer. People in the community want transparency. When I look at this on the agenda, I don't know how much is going to what. Seems like a pretty simple solution to just be more specific and more transparent about how much is going to each area. I don't know how other trustees feel about that.
Yeah. Most of it has to do with the.
I'm sorry, Olivia, just,
Yes. Yeah, most of it
Thank you.
has to do with the tuition. This is really to do with one student from St. Christopher's who enrolled in the middle of the school year. When we were doing the budget in 2019, we had only 3 kids. We are responsible for up to 6 students. One student enrolled during the middle of the school year. I have to say right away that that cost is picked up by New York City.
Right.
So we have to find money for it, and then we recoup it from New York City.
Can I ask?
This is for the 4th student, really. That's a big ticket item.
Right. Can I ask you a question? Just a clarifying question. So are you asking or suggesting that within the resolution itself, right, the $393,000 is just broken out in broader buckets, right?
Correct.
Not necessarily a whole list of all the transfers, or is that what you're saying?
No, I guess the way I would visualize it is for each thing, EPC, you would have parentheses with the specific.
Like in a table?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
On the resolution itself.
I think so. Or it doesn't
Okay.
even, to me, it doesn't even have to be a table. It just has to be, in parentheses next
Broken
to,
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we
Got
get a lot of questions about budget transfers.
Right.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
like that.
We'll take care of that.
Thank
The reason
you.
I read through this, I wanted to highlight them in that way, but with the dollar amount, then it'll be on there. I won't have to do that, and it'll be all transparent.
But we do have the legal fees piece attached.
Yeah,
Right.
we got the backup. It was
Right.
clear.
Right.
We know what we're approving, of course, or about to approve. Presumptuous, but I think showing the public would be additional level of transparency.
Right. So the things that are confidential, we would hold them as confidential. personnel, legal stuff, and just keep it in a broader category.
Yep.
It's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions on budget transfers? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you. Action F, approval of our claims audit report for February 2021. Is there a motion? And a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Action G, which is the adoption of policies, as discussed on March 25th and as per New York State Education Department effective April 15th. Motion? Second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions on the adoption of these policies? Comments? I'm going to say one more time, thank you to the policy committee. Appreciate it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
It's the coolest committee around.
I know, I tried to get back on this year, remember? I never should have gotten off. Action H, approval of an agreement between North Shore and Swaggart Productions to provide video streaming services for use at our Board of Ed meetings. Is there a motion?
Motion.
A second?
Second.
Okay, questions or comments?
I had sent some questions to Peter on the agreement prior to the meeting. There, paragraph 8.3 has an attorney's fees
Yes.
provision, which would probably, because of the size of the contract, never ever go there. But it's common in Texas, where is the place of business of Swaggart, but it's not as common in New York. And then there was an automatic renewal period, which I didn't know if a board could legally renew a contract for the following year, automatically renew a contract for the following year when they are not the board for that next year.
All right, so
That
I'm
was
sorry,
like
James.
paragraph 10, I think. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Once
And just for the public's information, we have live streaming now, but what this will do will be to, I hope, improve the quality of hair, but also, more than a hair, but also create indexing that will make it easier to watch. You don't necessarily always want to view every minute of our board meetings. I'm sure most people do, but not everyone does. And it will also be indexed with our agenda and with additional backup information. So it'll make it much easier, much more, for lack of a better term, three-dimensional as a way of revisiting what we're doing here to help bring people into the process. So for example, you may not be interested in everything we're covering, but if you want to find out just about a particular discussion that we're having, you can scoot right to that, and it'll be there with backup for the public as well. So that was a goal previously listed by the board, but I thought as long as we're here, we should discuss that.
Yeah, so you'll be able to actually click on the, so if you're interested in a specific agenda item, you can click on that agenda item and it will bring you right to that point of the video. So you don't have to snake through stuff.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment that I saw that there was video on demand closed captioning. So for those individuals who are hearing impaired, they still can participate in the meeting. I
Yes.
had a question whether transcription is available.
Don't know.
I think when we discussed it, it was, but I think there was an extra fee, yes? That's my recollection. I could
With
be
this
completely
particular vendor.
There's an
imagining
additional,
it.
there's an additional fee, right?
Well, they're all
And it's a
additional
lot.
fees.
Yes.
Yes?
Because the
So that's our director of technology was commenting that live streaming, real-time closed captioning is not cheap, which makes sense.
But I don't think that we could, based on cost, not be transparent and have our meetings available to individuals who would
Okay.
require it based on their disability.
So right now, it's written as an option in the contract.
Mhm.
So theoretically, we could vote at a future meeting, which will be before it's actually ready, to exercise that option
Yeah, we'll get that. I'll talk to Mr. K tomorrow.
and get some, give us some backup, the
We'll
cost
get,
and all
we'll
that.
get you the options, sure.
Thank you.
Did I capture that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Very good. Okay, we'll call the vote. All in favor of approving this contract pending review by, final review by council? All in favor? All right, thank you. We will move on to action I, approval of a rental agreement between North Shore and Preferred Events, known as LI Long Island Movie Nights. Is there a motion?
Motion?
Second? Questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. It's a swim.
Fun.
Yes.
Movies, food trucks, great for kids.
Yes, I was the high school parent org meeting tonight, and it's they're excited. They're really looking to bring so much life back to
And I
that.
will tell you, just I know it's not, it's partially to do with this, but I want to thank our senior parent committee. They are working like all the time to make the senior experience really special for kids. So you know who you are, and I thank you very much for the work you're doing. It's fabulous.
I will second that.
It really has been. It's been a lovely week. They've had like gifts for small gifts when they come in during the mornings. It's lovely.
They had maroon whoopie pies.
Yeah, but there
Wow.
were whoopie pies. Exactly.
That sounds good. Okay, all in favor of approving movie night? All right,
Aye.
thank you. Action J, approval of agreement between North Shore and Teresa Probst for provision of vision services. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second?
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Action K, which is approval of the special education IEPs. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Thank you. And a second? Any questions on these? Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Action L, a resolution approving the property tax report card prepared by the district's business office for the 2021 annual district meeting. Is there a motion? Thank you.
Second.
Second, thank you. Any questions?
No.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, trustee Russo?
So on the property tax report card, it shows that the general fund balance for next year will be 7%. I just want to ask the question, that includes the Montesano Levine money, which is part of the reason why it's over 4%?
You're absolutely right.
All right, are there any other funds that are in there that have no other place to go, which is why the general fund is at 7% rather than 4%?
It is just those two, including the 4%, that is 4% of the subsequent year's budget as well as the Masolino grant.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on the property tax report card? Okay, get a little swivel here at the live meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. And action M, which is the approval of a health services agreement between Plainview Old Bethpage and North Shore for students who attend public schools within POB but are residents here. Is there a motion? A second?
No.
I'm sorry, attend non-publics within the POB school district. They still call it POB? Okay. So we have a motion and a second, Betty, I'm sorry? And I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Aye, thank you. Finally, action N, which is approval of our pit musicians for the spring musical, The Addams Family, which looks great. I'm excited. Is there a motion?
Motion.
And a second? Did you carry? Thank you. Any questions on the pit musicians? All in favor? Aye. Thank you. That brings us to old business. Is there old business?
I have several items for old business.
All right, I'll tell you what, do one or two and then we'll pop around and come back.
Okay. The posting of the petition on the website, that's the petition that you need to get filled out in order to run for the Board of Education. So I brought it up before, we were told that we had to check with council. We checked with council, it is perfectly legal to post it on the website. I think for we need to do it very soon if we're going to do this, since they're due on the 19th. So, and we're on the 15th. I think for transparency, there's no reason why that petition and whatever information you need to run for the Board of Education shouldn't be on the website, that you could download and print out. People are sometimes, shy about going into central office if they're on the fence. This way they can prepare it and do whatever they want to do. And I don't really think there's any need for us to know who pulls a petition. There's a need for us to know who is actually running, but there's no need for us to know who actually pulls a petition. So I would be in favor, based upon the information we have, to post the petition and any other information that needs to go with that on the website, so a person can freely download it, print it, and get their signatures to run for the Board of Ed.
I'm just curious, just because we haven't done it before, are there other school districts or municipalities that do this routinely? Because I'm just wondering if anyone does it and what information they put with it, right? Because we all have the experience that when you go pick it up, the clerk informs you of various requirements, and you need to do this, that, and the other, so that when you come back with your petitions, there are no surprises. But is this routine? Does any other entity post this online?
I don't know for sure. I will say in the places that I have worked in my career, it has not been, but that doesn't mean it can't be.
There are instructions with it, and if you
I'm not saying it's right or wrong.
No, I'm just going to say there are instructions with it, and that should be posted with it. And if you have a question, you can call the clerk. There's no reason for that not to be on the website. And honestly, I really don't care what other districts do. I think we have always led the way
I'm not
with
disagreeing.
transparency, and I think this is something we should be doing.
I just can't think of like the village or anything. I was just looking for an example, but no one knows of one.
If I could, I think, since I'm not asking Betty to comment on this now, absolutely not, but I think any discussion on that should involve her feedback and her opinion, since she conducts the elections and receives the petitions, just to get information. I think it would be appropriate to have it clear on the website that if you are interested in running, reach out to the village, to the district clerk for a petition and the other information. And so if Betty, I know when I had run last time, Betty sat with me and went through what I needed to do, what deadlines were, and I know that could be posted on the website. But I think since she's the one who's conducting it, that she should be part of the conversation. And I'm not asking you to be part of the conversation tonight on that, but I think her input is valuable on that, would be valuable.
April 15th, they're due April 19th, and this is not the first time I've raised this. I've raised it several times. And if that's what you wanted, Tim, then we should have had that discussion beforehand.
Trustee McCary?
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned. I guess I would argue it's actually a lack of transparency to put it on the website. Because I remember when I ran, I picked up the petition. Betty gave me sort of like standard instructions. And if a candidate is just getting it off the website, they're going to not receive that information, and they will likely be at a disservice. So I think everyone getting the information the same way actually makes it more equitable to everybody.
Yeah, my perspective on it is, I think it's a good point, but I think that transparency to me is about sharing information. And I think that posting that application on the website isn't really about information becoming more available or more transparent. And so I don't see it quite through that same lens. And obviously we all know the experience because we're all here. So we all went to the district clerk and picked up the petitions, and we learned about Meet the Candidates. We learned about the statements in Newsday. We learned a little bit about the process of serving on the board, which is certainly involved. I don't want to go into any more detail than that, but it's not a light engagement that you're signing up for. And so to my thoughts is that stopping by the district clerk's office to pick up that petition seems this is just my take on it, is pretty easy to do. You're going to be popping by that district office, going to be coming to meetings. It seems like it's not a high threshold to be met to come in there and have a conversation with the clerk about the
I
process.
think if you have to ask what is involved in being a trustee when you're picking out the petition, you shouldn't be running.
That may or may not be the case, but
And you know what? Not everyone has someone helping them. So it's a starting point for people to go on the website, get the information, make a decision as to whether they want to go in and have that conversation. There is absolutely no reason not to have that petition on the website, other than you want to know who pulled the application. And it does sound like people that the administration would want to know who is actually pulling the petition. So to me, I think it's there. I absolutely view it as not being transparent.
I think that's a fair position. I think, the
It's just a way to manipulate who runs.
I think that is unfair.
I
I think
do
that's
too. We
unfair.
publish a calendar that we provide to everyone that says when and how to file a petition. And what concerns me more is people doing it incorrectly and showing up on that day and then feeling very wronged that their petition isn't accepted because they didn't do it right. And that's what we want to avoid.
I think it also should be noted, you don't have to go to central office to get the petition. You just need to contact Betty, and Betty can also email it to you. So if you're not interested in making the trip, you still have access to the petition. And if I believe correctly, when you hand in the petition, you also need to hand in a notarized financial disclosure. So I don't, it's not just putting the petition online. You also have this notarized financial disclosure that needs to be explicated.
Right, all of which can be put on the website.
Right. Right now, we have none of that on the website. We have last year's petition on the website because of COVID. Having this conversation is even unique. I don't recall in all my years of going to Board of Ed meetings that we've had a conversation like this in such great detail. I see nothing wrong with putting it on the website. We have everything on our website. People can read. If there's a process, they can read the process. If they would love to go in to see Betty, which I always do, and have the conversation in detail about the unique process of filing the petition, they can do that. She can email it as well with all the explanation documents behind it. I don't see any reason not to post this information. People will look for it. What we do now, it's 2021. We look to websites for our information for most everything now.
We should have more information. I don't think there's any question. More information.
And it should be obvious. It shouldn't be buried.
So I think that we clearly are not in unanimity about the path forward on this. Obviously, today is the 15th, and petitions for the people watching or people here are due on the 19th of this month, which is Monday. So certainly anyone interested who's watching this, you should contact Betty Campy as of now, which is what the policy is. Do we want to, I don't see how we change that before this election.
can we
You'd have to put it on the agenda, right? We just would agree to,
Yes.
Tim.
Can we put something on the website on the, that if you would like a petition, you could contact.
So if I were to
if
summarize-
if you're interested in running, reach out to.
I would say we don't have
the
unanimity on being able to do it solely through the website, but I think it's pretty clear we have unanimity on getting more information out there on the website. Would you agree, Tim?
Absolutely.
Good. Everyone believes that's at least a step for now that we can agree on? Okay. So you can work with Shelley and put that information in there, and there is a lot on there, and that can help the process. Okay?
It's 5 p.m. It's due Monday, April 19th, 5
Yes. Does anyone know, Betty, do you know how many signatures are required this year? 39 signatures. It's normally a percentage of the previous year's vote, but because last year's vote was a unique scenario because of the mail-in, the Board of Elections or State Ed? State Ed, which regulates the election, the governor. Thank you. Governor issued I'm sorry, buddy. The mic. I'm sorry. Governor issued an executive order reverting to 2019 election numbers.
So 2% of the total vote from 2019.
Okay.
39.
Thank you.
Which doesn't seem like a lot, except you're in the world of COVID and people aren't out on the ball fields like they were, or in areas where you could just go one afternoon and get 39 signatures, which is why this information should be on the website.
Okay. So we'll work on getting that on the website and we'll mark it as a discussion item for future agenda. And we can also find out what some comparable districts are doing, even though it doesn't necessarily matter to everyone. People ask, so we want to be able to have that in there. Okay? Other old business. Trustee McCary.
Hi, I was wondering if we have any updated opt-out rates, opt-out numbers.
Sure. So we have right now 510 responses. That's the total 3 through 8 number. About 260 of those are at the middle school. So I'll provide you, once we get some more of a closing point on that, we're leaving it open and we'll send a reminder. The principals have been sending it in the last email.
I want to thank you again for all the communication about the state testing and how easy you made it for families to opt out.
Tim?
Sure. The trustee Russo had brought up in old business last time, something that I had raised during one of the budget discussions concerning the elimination of the English teacher in the writing center. And I know, I mean, that is seeing where things are in September. It is something that I'd like to see restored. And also, I think you're going to have a lot of students who are going to be a little bit behind in the high school. And I would look forward to seeing it expanded. And I've said this before, beyond just a English writing center. And I've mentioned something that exists in my school that covers all subject areas. And I think that is something worth pursuing going forward, especially next year.
I think, Tim, they do some other things in it, like SAT and ACT prep. It's not necessarily just
Right.
a writing center, but you are correct. It could be better advertised. It could be expanded in its use. Like, this was something that I worked with Ed and the prior boards to bring to the school, and I think it was it is effectively utilized, but it could be utilized more. And I think you raise a very good point that students are going to be could be very far behind and really in need of that extra in-person assistance with their writing assignments. They've lost a year and a half, essentially, these kids.
You know, Tim's brought this up before, and it is, I think the point he's been trying to make in the past has been that it's an equity issue too, which is obviously a big chunk of what we've been talking about with the strategic plan. And I'm just wondering if it rises to the level of a more robust discussion on an agenda at some point about how these various extra help centers and everything come together, and if we need to really do something more substantial for the board to be clear on what exists now and what we could do to go further with it.
Right, and that's a good point, Sarah, because they do use it for applications, for college applications for the essays. And, you know, if you have a lot of money, you can hire someone to help your child with their college essay. But if you don't, you're going to the writing center. So,
and when you talk about right across all disciplines, I'm sure not everyone on the board knows the big picture of what we do have available.
That would be helpful.
Okay. So you want to have a discussion item on what?
Help.
What?
Okay. Yeah, I think it can be limited to that topic at the high school.
Right? We're not talking about someone who needs like systemic ongoing, right? We're talking about ad hoc support, help, homework assistance.
Understood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I will say that we've been working through our staffing discussions and section counts. And so based on how that is shaking out, there might be an avenue to be able to restore at least some of that. But we're working through those numbers now.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
I have another item of old business if no one else does.
I would say go. I saw your finger there. Marianne will go, and then you'll go next. Okay.
This is a quick one.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. I had asked about using some of the bond money to ventilate the large spaces and using some of the fund balance to give us options as to ventilate the large spaces. Since ventilation is part of the bond, I thought maybe we could use some of the balance under the balance in the bond that we are not using at the middle school to ventilate the larger spaces. And you were going to ask bond counsel about that?
Yeah, I didn't get to talk to bond counsel, I'll be very, but anytime that you are doing a bond and you haven't finished phase 2, and we go straight to some of the other projects, it becomes a problem because the economy is picking up. And it's likely we will not be as lucky with phase 2 as we are with phase 1. So unless that phase is completed, I am a little bit hesitant about using monies that we don't know whether to cover phase 2. Otherwise, like Alan said today, you get to the end of the project and you wouldn't have enough money to cover it. So my thing is that when I project the fund balance, that will be an avenue to look at it, whether we can have some monies left in the general fund budget that we could allocate.
We would encumber the funds, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
like we did with the playground mulch, right? The playground removal. At the end
Yes,
of the year,
yes,
we encumbered
yes.
$750,000
Correct.
to
Let's
cover the
look at-
playgrounds.
Let's look at that, but I think we're also going to talk about the state aid and all the other available funds through the state legislature, which includes ventilation. So those are some of the areas that we can look at.
Right, that's
Then-
700,000, right?
Not only that, we also have the ESSA money, which is coronavirus response relief.
That's another 300, so
supplement.
you have about $1 million.
$334,000. I have to say that the guidance is not out yet. We are still reading through it, we are going through it, but it does include, one of the areas they want us to cover is safety, ventilation. We went through a whole webinar today. I think Lisa went through it.
Yes.
It was really very interesting. Yes, it covers ventilation. So those are some, but with the EPA money that we are talking about, 20% of that has to be allocated to learning loss. It's something that Dr. Z and I and Dr. G have been talking about already. So, and ventilation for large spaces is a big ticket item.
I do know.
Yes.
That's where I'm looking for the money because
Yes.
you want to get, one goes hand in hand with the other, right? You want to get the kids back.
Yes.
You want to get them back safely.
Yes.
One of the issues is the large spaces, that the guidance that initially came out talked about the cafeterias, the gymnasiums, all those areas. And we know the calculations are large for the number of HEPA filters we would need in there.
Correct.
Or the possibility of doing it through the chillers, right? Or the cooling towers, one or the other. But either way, it's not a cheap number.
It's not.
No, so
Anything-
I'm sorry, Olivia, go ahead.
Oh, no, I said,
I thought this was gonna be quick.
trying to finish it up with Marianne.
Please,
Anything
yeah.
mechanical is expensive.
Yeah, so what we think, what we have been talking about is using the federal monies that are coming in to fund those projects. It'll actually likely be faster to do it that way than through the bond money, because the monies will be available to us. The second part of supplemental projects, right, is that what we would do is design supplemental projects now to and bid them as alternates. So add alternates during the bidding process. So we wouldn't commit. So if you don't have enough money to fund it, you pull that project out. So all the supplementals that we would do, and the supplementals that exist right now are largely around the science research center that I had written to the board about, the replacement / repair of the press box. So right now the press box at the athletic field, it's in a bit of rough shape, but we can get through with repairing it and it will be fine. But replacing it is much more costly, and it's going to require a lot more stuff. There's also a lot of security work in the supplemental work. So what we'll do over the next several weeks, and we'll talk about this at our upcoming construction steering committee meeting, is lay out, here are the options that exist for what can be done. Here is what I think, as we've worked through this project, that I think you should design for. And then if you find yourself in a place where you can fund it when the bids go out, then you'll have a priority list of projects that you may wish to do or not do. But right now, because we're in design development, it's important for us to do the design work so it moves along in the process as we go along. And once it's designed, you can, even if you don't fund it, in the next fund, you have it designed and you can do it at another time.
Yeah,
with
but
other
my
monies.
only thought was that right now at the middle school, we are air conditioning large spaces. So if
Yeah.
there was a way to mechanically filter the air and utilize the bond money when we're doing it, because retrofitting is always way more expensive than new construction. And the mechanical engineer even said that at our last bond
Correct.
steering committee meeting. So if you are putting in new spaces at the middle school and we are putting in new AC in the library and in the gym, right? There, wouldn't it make sense for everyone's health and safety if we're doing that, if we can fund it through the bond project, right? To add that to the HVAC, to the mechanical components
But it will be.
in those large spaces.
It will be. Right, so the design will include design of MERV 13 filtration.
It depends on what we're talking about, right? If you're talking about MERV 13.
I'm talking about the HEPA.
Right, but if you're talking about HEPA or,
Right.
right, the ultraviolet system, that's
Right, because what
very good.
Pierre was talking, not Pierre, what's his name? Was talking about was putting
Jeremy.
it in with the rooftop units, which I would assume we're doing.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that there may be a way to do that.
Yeah.
They're looking into it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're doing in those large spaces.
Yeah.
Right.
So if it costs us, if we're under $1 million at the middle school, and it costs us a little bit now to include that in that part of the middle school, and we have the money in the bond and we can cover it in the bond,
Yeah.
why wouldn't we do it up front rather than trying
Yeah,
to
I
go back and fix it
Yeah.
after we spent
Yeah.
$4 million at
I
the
think-
middle school? It makes
Yeah.
no sense to me.
I think we have to bring it up at the next construction steering committee.
That's
This is
Tuesday.
This is what we discussed with the construction managers and the contractors.
All right, can you
Because
make a note
we
to,
can offset it with cost allowance or something that is already built into the contract.
Right, is the
It
mechanical
makes
engineer
sense.
gonna be there on Tuesday?
We'll make sure he is.
Okay, I could bring my mechanical engineer if you want.
So we'll get some numbers on that and be able to make it, concretize it. Lisa?
Yes. This is old business, and I just want to thank Janine for coming and providing us with her comments and perspective on the Assistant Director of Special Education. I've been where you've been. To that end, I'd like to request that we keep some gather data on the caseloads of the special education department in terms of, and you've already provided us with some numbers about the outstanding IEP meetings, 504 requests and such. The IEP packet this week was heavy on parent requests for meetings, reviews. That was concerning, and I went back to a couple of previous meeting packets, and so it's increased. It increased the meetings before that as well, so, the packet before that as well. So if we could keep an eye on that. I'm concerned about overloading the department with those administrative functions of the CSE. And my primary concern is making sure families and their children are well taken care of when they're forming these CSEs and meeting and making sure that the kids are getting what they need. So if we could just keep track.
We can definitely get the caseloads. I would just say, just want to be clear, I would never recommend anything forward that I thought was going to negatively impact the program or the staffing or the caseloads. We've looked at those things. So
I know it was very difficult search for those individuals for the past year to replace.
right, and yes, and also the program has been somewhat overstaffed for several years. So this was an opportunity for us to course correct that.
Excellent. All right. I'd just like to have the public understand the process we've been going through and
Yep.
figuring that out. So.
Thank you.
Other old business? Okay, I'll move on to new business. Please.
I shouldn't have had the caffeine before I came to the meeting. So with the questions surrounding the budget status reports, would it be possible to post the treasurer's report online and redact the account numbers or any proprietary information? We love redacting in the legal world. We do it all the time. So could we do that? Take out the account numbers? That would be the only thing that's proprietary.
We can take a look at it
We
and
can
see.
take a look at it.
Can the budget status report just be separated
Yeah.
from
maybe-
that?
no,
Because
that-
I mean, it's
that's
just
what I was
another
thinking.
page. It's
I
the
was
next
gonna
page.
suggest that.
Yeah.
It's another
Just that,
section.
without the bank statement maybe. So let's look at it, because some people are very good at, regardless of what you redact they are able to see it. And, the hacking is real.
It
We
slips.
we experience it.
It only takes one slip.
Right.
It just
I mean, we've seen it in IEPs.
Yes,
Right.
we've seen it, of course. But the idea of
Little
separating them also might be
That would work too. I just want it up somewhere so that people know we're getting it. It may not be in the format that they're thinking we're getting it, because I don't think there's a prescribed format, right? You can get it, different districts can do it different ways,
Yeah.
correct?
We can take
So
out the
what
bank
they-
statements.
What Manhasset does may not look like what we do, not the same format, but it's still the same information.
Ours is just more detailed than
Yeah, I like
Manhasset's.
our- I like
Ours
our
is
format.
significantly more detailed. But
I was just using that as a random example.
Okay, good point. Other new business?
I have new business,
Please.
it's a segue from Olivia's conversation with Marianne about state aid and our federal stimulus funds. I was wondering if we could schedule either another agenda discussion item of state aid, how it helps us and impacts our operations as a district, and how it sometimes hinders us. And if there are any aspects of this next fiscal year's budget that will cause us challenges, and if there are any that are giving us benefit. I think we've also read in the news about the federal stimulus funds, and there are two types. And I think the public would be interested in what they are, how much we're hopefully going to be allotted, and the guidance and criteria around how we can spend it, which we just started that conversation. I kind of landed into the whole state aid thing because I actually read those NISBA e-clips, the clipping service. And I had seen an article about Hendrick Hudson School District and this wonderful electric generation facility cessation mitigation fund, which is part of the enacted budget. And we've seen the email conversations about utilizing that and speaking with LAC about looking into that and how that fund has doubled. And it was set up to help municipalities who may be impacted by the shutdown of energy production facilities. In this case, it was Indian Point, correct, Peter?
Indian Point is
Right, the nuclear facility.
That's correct.
So, this doesn't have to be super macro conversation or a presentation. And the board has a table that you provided to us, but I think a little more context that would be digestible to the public would be nice. And I don't know if we have one more meeting before the budget vote, but I think it would be helpful for people to understand how our state helps us run the school district before we vote on a budget. I don't know if anyone else agrees.
Yeah.
I do, Lisa, and you sent that article to me, and it was very interesting because it was not just Indian Point. That was the initial,
right?
But it's available for any district or municipality who is suffering through New York State through the shutdown of a power facility. So we would probably technically fall within that with the LIPA plant having been eliminated for that aid. So I think it would be a really good discussion to have.
Yeah.
And it was good work picking that up. Thank you for sharing it with me. I appreciate it.
I think it's certainly worth talking about. And I think that to maybe make it even a little bit broader would be to have a general conversation about state aid, about federal stimulus, about FEMA reimbursement. I think there's a lot of confusion. I know there's less confusion for us because Olivia provides us with very detailed reports. Unfortunately, we're not at an end point yet, right? The end point is when Olivia gets a transfer, or Olivia sees a transfer, district gets a transfer. But I think it's important to the public who read articles in the paper, and there's a lot of misconception of what's actually happening. I think that would be very helpful for the community to understand how these different funds are actually hitting us and when and what we do with them.
Okay. Maybe we can do that for the next meeting?
I think that is certainly for the next meeting.
Okay. So we can
Because
do
it's
that.
happening.
Yep, absolutely. Like for just as a minor example, so state aid, our foundation aid went up by $238,000. So you think like that's great. Except that the expense aid side of the budget is likely to go down this year.
Right.
So while we're really appreciative that money is increased. I mean, that's terrific because if it hadn't increased, we wouldn't have it. But it may not be the windfall of cash in the end of the day that it may appear to be, just based alone on the expense-based aids that we've had last year. So that's only one little example, but we'll put that together for you for your next meeting for sure.
But the net effect, like we talked about, is that overall, compared to what the governor proposed, we are getting about $264,000. But that is an estimate. Because like Peter said, most of the expense aid pieces will be based on the information we send to the state this summer. And because we are not spending as much as we used to, especially with BOCES aid, that's a category that has gone down because during the pandemic, we had to defer the cabling job, the cabling work. And because of that, our state aid at that end is going to go down. And there were some students that will, some staff forms for special need kids that are not going to occur because of one or two reasons. All those things is going to decrease the aid. So it looks nice on paper, and true, the foundation aid is a great, because that's the general fund piece of the aid. And that we know is going up by 7.99%, which is a great thing. But the other expense-based aid are going down.
So I think that's perfect. We'll have a discussion. We'll go through every one, and we will learn. We'll debunk the myths. We'll see a running total. We'll see where it is, and we'll also know what we don't know.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank
Other
you.
new, Sarah?
Yeah, Lisa mentioning reading all the things we're sent all the time reminded me that we got some guidance from the state about single occupancy bathrooms needing signs that specifically said all gender and indicating some deadline. So I just wanted to check on
I'll
that.
follow up on that. Sure. Thank you.
Trustee McCary?
BOCES budget vote, we can't forget.
I have that on my list. Thank you.
Okay,
So we have the, may I?
please.
Yes. So the BOCES budget vote is scheduled for Tuesday. That has to be on Tuesday all through, I think, the state, but certainly Nassau County. We can do it at any point in time, but we have to do it Tuesday. I can do it in the morning, the evening. We have a construction steering committee meeting at 9 on Tuesday. If we want to tack that on before and do it virtually, we can do that. If you want to do it during the middle of the day, we can do that too. But I just need a quorum of you. I don't need all of you. I just need 4 of you.
Do you mind if we start with your initial suggestion of 8:30 in the morning on Monday and see if that does work?
Tuesday.
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 Sorry, Tuesday. Thank
If you're
you.
there on Monday, you're by yourself, Dave.
The 20th is what we're talking about.
Correct.
And so we have virtual construction steering.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so 8:30 works for me. Has it worked for
Fine.
other folks?
Yes.
I've never done it before. I have a 9:30 patient. How long does it take?
Takes
10 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay, I can do it.
Oh, 7 minutes is good. 7 o'clock in the morning seems a little draconian.
Fast.
And we're doing it virtually.
Virtually.
All right,
Yes,
I'm in.
So we've got a quorum.
that's a quorum. Great.
You won't.
Yeah, I'm fine. Send us a reminder.
Okay.
Super. And just make sure Rich knows also.
Yeah, I'll send it out. We'll just send it out to the whole board, and whoever can be there can be there. All right.
Terrific.
Betty, that's a plan.
Other new business. Sorry.
No, it's your meeting.
Okay, I think at that point, I will make a motion to adjourn. All in
Second.
favor? A second? Let's do it. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.